I'm Kent Calder, our Vice Dean here at SAIS for Faculty Affairs, and it's an honor to be here and to say just a few words to introduce what I know is going to be an exciting conference. Our Dean Elliot Cohen would certainly be here, and he wanted to convey his regards. He's in the middle of an airplane headed for the Middle East right now, so he was sorry that he couldn't be here. I can see from what I have looked over and certainly what I've heard, you really do have an exciting schedule here today, beginning with Ann Witkowsky, with her experience in the Department of Defense and a range of issues that will be giving a keynote address in just a few minutes. Ambassador Laura Holgate, I was happy to see that our faculty member, Sarah Jordan, is going to be moderating that. I'm also proud that our Professor Liesl Hintz, who is doing some exciting work on Turkey. As many of you know, she has an interesting book out on that. Later on, she'll be moderating, but moderating from a very exciting panel with Paula Dobriansky, Mary Ellsberg, Donita Starks, Ambassador Cindy Kohrville. So an exciting range of participants. I was just reading this morning, thinking about what I should say, and I really don't want to spend long. I was rereading a piece about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her struggle during Reed versus Reed, and thinking that that's now, 35, 40 years ago. And it's, of course, a remarkable history, the evolution of economic equality, but obviously not completed in any way. I thought a bit of my mother and my sister, who are both professionals, and thinking what they have been through in some small way. There's a long way to go, as you point out in your materials, and as I think is common sense to all of us. The U.S. ranks 72nd globally in women's representation in national legislatures. I know the governor of Tokyo, I'm a Japan specialist, who did work on Africa for quite a few years earlier on in my career, but Koike Yoriko, who's governor of Tokyo, I know quite well, and again, she certainly has been through a lot in her struggle to lead Tokyo and toward the Olympics next year. In all of this, I know that SAIS Women's Lead SAIS Women Lead is doing a lot, has been doing a lot. Particularly, something that was impressive to me as I began to learn about was the SAIS Women's Lead Practicum that Chichi Nwankwo actually is leading. As many of you know, they're going to 3 countries, well, at least 3 countries I know, and across the globe, starting with Nepal and the Philippines and Africa as well. And to get a practical sense of what issues are involved, and it's very interactive. As most of you know, they need to bring in clients, interact with clients on issues relating to leadership. So that's an exciting project. One that I have a little bit of personal familiarity with is the Asian University for Women, which is in Bangladesh, and of course plays an important role on development. We have had students here at SAIS who, from there, we want very much to expand the fellowship program there. We're working on fellowships to bring more women from developing countries in Asia here to SAIS to begin to accelerate that development process. And Cathy Matsui, I'm proud to say, who I've known quite well. Her sister actually was a student of mine once. Cathy, who is a SAIS graduate, is one of the major sponsors and spearheads for that movement. But most of all today, and I don't want to take more than a minute more, but I think we should, perhaps because she won't be able to say too much about herself. But I'd like to say just a few words about Chichi Nwankwo, who teaches comparative African politics for us this next spring term. She's going to be teaching, and she is a thoughtful and important scholar on electoral issues, African politics, and gender issues relating to the political process of Africa. As I said years ago, early in my career, I've spent 3.5 years in Africa. And I do see in a small way the importance of the issues that she works on. She has a new piece that some of you may know, research work on Nigerian elections, including the most recent one, and gendered politics in Nigeria. Across West Africa more generally, of course, there are so many cases. Ellen Johnson and others who have played key roles in the transition from tremendous turbulence in African politics to more stable and constructive politics in the region. So that question, the research issues that Chichi works on, I certainly think are very important. And I'm sure here and there we will hear more about those in the context of the broad issue of women's leadership. So it's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the opportunity, and I wish you all the best in your meetings today. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning. That's more like it. Well, just before I say anything, please tweet at us. It's SAIS WL, at SAIS WL. That's what's happening right now. So it's a genuine privilege to welcome you all to our first SAIS Women Lead annual conference. This conference will focus on advancing women's leadership in peace and security. We, as you can see, have assembled a variety of events and prompts, all of which, as a whole, we hope, provides a cohesive experience for you in the few hours we spend here together today. As will soon become clear, we adopt an expansive notion of leadership, peace, and security, ranging from the traditional understandings in relation to conflict, to those that center individual agency in championing institutional change, to those that refocus the role of gender in shaping attitudes like confidence, that reinforces leadership capacity, and last but not least, to understandings that reinforces leadership as empowerment embedded in everyday living. We're honored to have with us today a very distinguished list of speakers and panelists who will reflect on these issues, and we are certainly happy that you honored our invitation and that you're here. This conference comes at a critical time. The world recently celebrated the 20th year anniversary of the United Nations Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, which embeds a gendered lens in policy frameworks and efforts to maintain peace and security. Nevertheless, women's status and rights has been under threats and attacks in recent times, as you all know. Globally, as xenophobic populism and bellicose nationalism, right, is on the rise. And this, as we know, is partly in response to hyper-globalization and its contradictions of economic expansion and inequality, expanding inequality at the same time. These attacks threaten women's meaningful participation and roll back the gains made in previous years. Here, however, at SAIS, which, as we all know, is the premium graduate school of international affairs in the country, we understand that exclusion of women from leadership in international affairs actively undermines the possibility of global stability and ensuring peace and security, both domestically and internationally. SAIS is therefore committed to going beyond mere symbolic gestures. It commits to signaling a substantive and meaningful inclusion of women in international affairs leadership through its support of SAIS Women Lead, which seeks to create a vibrant platform of scholarship and programming, including establishing a strong research platform and footprint, creating curricular and co-curricular programming to provide our students with the skills they need to become effective leaders on these domestic and international decision-making arenas. For this year, some of our students are registered in 3 Practicum projects. One conducts a barrier analysis on women's political participation in Ethiopia. The second conducts a gendered analysis of disaster response, recovery, and reconstruction in the Philippines towards creating resilient communities. And the third constructs a community approach to gender-based violence prevention in Nepal. The students are currently working on their desk deliverables while preparing for research field trips during the intersession in January. We recognize that this is a tall order, so we will very much looking to partner with you going forward as we look forward to achieving this. We have a couple hours ahead of us, and so we will continue to have this conversation. But for right now, I just really want to say thank you for coming. We have a really great day mapped ahead of us, and we're hoping that this is a conversation that we'll keep having. For now, the SAIS Women Lead has a presentation. Thank you again. Well, the students have spoken, right? I have a pleasure of introducing our keynote. And Witkowsky is a national security expert who has served in leadership positions across the government and in the private sector. Most recently, she served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Stability and Humanitarian Affairs in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, where her broad portfolio included stabilization, peace operations, disaster response, and human rights policy. Prior to that, she had held senior roles in the U.S. State Department's Bureau of Counterterrorism, coordinating programs and policies to stem the spread of terrorist organizations, strengthen security, screening, and information sharing, and counter violent extremism. Earlier in her career, she served on the White House National Security Council staff as a Director for Defense Policy and Arms Control with a focus on conventional arms control. In between her government service, Ms. Witkowsky was a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where she authored and contributed to a number of publications. She currently serves on the boards of several non-governmental organizations. She holds a BA in Russian and East European Studies from Yale University and an MPA from Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Please join me in welcoming Anne Witkowsky.
Thank you. Am I using, I don't know how I'm mic'd up here. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Wong. As I said earlier, with a name like Witkowsky, I'm very sensitive to name pronunciations, and I hope that you're not going to hold against me that I'm a graduate of the Kennedy School. I'm really happy to be here today. I'm a practitioner. I am definitely not an academic, so I'm going to be speaking to you today with a practitioner's lens. And you do have a great program coming up after I'm here. I'm honored to be here with Ambassador Laura Holgate, who you're going to hear from next, and we have the DCM from the Afghan Embassy, and if we have any other representatives from the diplomatic community Welcome. Thank you very much for coming and for listening. And thank you to SAIS Women Lead. I think this is really an extraordinary program. I was sitting next to Laura, and we didn't have anything like that remotely close to this kind of support when we were graduate students. And though speaking for myself, I've lived a very happy, productive career in national security. Wow, what a difference something like this makes. So you're all lucky to be here. Okay. Well, did you know that when women and civil society groups participate in peace negotiations, agreements are 64% less likely to fail and 35% more likely to last at least 15 years? Some of you are doing research in the field, and you might know that, but I'll bet a number of you do not. This is against a backdrop in which more than 1/2 of armed conflicts that achieve peace lapse back into violence at a median rate of 7 years. So the women involved are doing pretty well. Or did you know that research involving hundreds of resistance campaigns around the world has found that the greater the role of women in the campaign, the more likely the campaign remains nonviolent and the more effective it is at building genuine political and social power to achieve its aims? As former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has said, the reason I made women's issues central to American foreign policy was not because I was a feminist, but because we know that societies are more stable if women are politically and economically empowered. Women's leadership makes a difference, as Secretary Albright notes, and increasingly we're seeing the research, thank you, and hearing the experiences that tell us how. Whether deploying in peace operations, engaging in peace negotiations, holding elective office, serving in the military, or leading foreign or defense ministries, we now have so many contemporary examples of women's contributions and why they matter. And we have you, the women who are soon to be embarking on a career in development, diplomacy, and defense. You are the next generation of women leaders, and we also have some women leaders from our community here in the audience who can role model for those of you who are in school. And as much as there are challenges for women and work ahead to create greater participation and opportunity, let me start by telling you that as you start out, and I am speaking to the students here, it will feel so different than it did for me in 1988, when my career was beginning. I can remember when, at a massive diplomatic conference in Paris to ban the use of chemical weapons when I was part of the delegation, with my 2 male colleagues, I approached a Soviet deputy foreign minister standing on his own at a reception. He was the lead arms control negotiator for the Soviet Union at the time. He was off to the side. We 3 were junior staff, and we bravely introduced ourselves as members of the American delegation. This might have been foolish, but we did it. The conversation, however, did not go on with pleasantries as one might have expected. I introduced myself and my colleagues in Russian, which I had studied in school. The Soviet deputy foreign minister looked at me and looked at my colleagues and looked back at me again and said to me sternly, "What are you doing in this business? Chemical weapons are not for a girl." We couldn't figure out if he was being humorous or serious, and the conversation did not go particularly well after that. And let me add, my 2 male colleagues definitely had my back around this giant cultural divide. Well, 1988 was a long time ago, but it doesn't seem very long ago to me when there were only a few professional women in the workplace in the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy when I started, and in leadership roles at state, as well as among delegations with whom we worked abroad. And my experiences are hardly singular. You're going to hear later today from some remarkable women who have even more accomplished resumes than mine, hear their stories, their advice, and gain their lessons learned for success. Fundamentally, we have every right to be optimistic about women's participation in this field and about the potential for women, peace, and security policies, which I'll talk a little more about today. But we have to be clear-eyed about the way ahead and the work required to advance women in the field and close the gender gap. Fundamental to this progress will be so many factors, the kinds of programs that you can take advantage of here at SAIS, in the academic community, and outside in the policy world, leadership. leadership on the part of women, but also on the part of men. And we have all, I can look at Laura and say, been the beneficiaries of men who have supported us at every step along the way. There are some positive and concerning aspects to the number and roles of women in foreign policy and defense in the United States, and I have taken an US lens. According to the recently released Foreign Policy Her Power Index, non-military foreign policy agencies in the United States reached gender parity nearly a decade ago. That includes the fields of diplomacy, development, and non-military defense. Honestly, that was a little surprising to me when I read it, and it's good news. The number does drop significantly when one includes the military to around 30%. That is by comparison to, and still below, the average percentage of female graduates from US institutions with bachelor's and master's degrees in international relations, which was about 56% over the last decade. And recently, as documented in this report, there's been a slippage by a few percentage points in those agencies where there was near parity, particularly in the diplomacy and non-military defense. That means the defense, the civilian side of the Defense Department, as I read the study. In some agencies, women in the last decade have been hired at a slower rate than men. This is a worrisome trend, and I think it merits unpacking. Women are still underrepresented in higher echelons of leadership. As of August 2019, women on average account for only 1/3 of foreign policy agencies' top leadership in the US. For example, in the State Department, some 44 women have been appointed as ambassadors out of 189 ambassadorships. Within the Pentagon, there's currently only one female undersecretary, and only 15% of senior defense officials are women. That is not a good piece of news. Defense has never exceeded 23% of those positions as female, although I will say, when I served in the Obama administration in my most recent position, we had, I think, near parity in women at the Deputy Assistant Secretary level, which was my level, and it felt right. It felt like a proper mix, and the kind of diversity, at least gender diversity, that would be preferable to see in all places and at all times. And at the very top levels, although we've had 3 female secretaries of state, we have not yet had a female secretary of defense. Globally, as has already been mentioned, women are underrepresented in general and in top leadership roles. For example, as I count, something over 30 women foreign ministers and under 24 women defense ministers at this time. As we talk about these numbers, we're not just applying the value set of equality and equity, although they are about this as well. Research shows that diverse teams are stronger and more effective. They are more creative and innovative and more likely to avoid dangerous groupthink. So there is efficacy in increasing women's inclusion. And you know this because you study it all the time, but I think we have to say it. Falling short of gender parity is not due to a lack of exceptional female candidates. To do better calls for a renewed commitment, because I think there has been commitment over time in the past here, and dedication on the part of leaders. And I think we have promising news on that front. The Leadership Council for Women in National Security, a relatively new nonprofit organization, has asked major 2020 presidential campaigns to pledge that if elected, they will seek gender parity in their national security appointments. Most of the Democratic candidates have by now signed on to that pledge, and one of the Republican candidates has as well, not the incumbent president, I should say. So the challenge and the opportunity lies ahead is in, again, recruiting, retaining, and promoting more women to senior leadership positions, as well as in maintaining the support of those who already understand why this is important and broadening the appreciation and understanding among those who do not. And what about the policy framework for advancing women's roles in peace and security? Again, being the optimist, and I am because I have a long-ish view of more than 30 years, I would say we have a good news on that front as well, with a number of heavy boulders, however, that still need to be rolled uphill. For those of you who are not familiar with the agenda on women, peace, and security, let me take a couple minutes to remind you how far we've come. In 2000, the UN Security Council passed UN Security Council Resolution 1325, which recognized the disproportionate impact of armed conflict on women and underscored the importance of women's equal and full participation in the prevention of resolution of conflicts, peace building, and peacekeeping. That was a seminal event that year 2000 in that resolution that firmly established the link between equality and rights for women on the one hand and the well-being of society on another. In 2010, some 10 years later from the passage of the resolution, the United States committed to developing a national action plan on women, peace, and security, very much under the leadership of Secretary of State Clinton at the time and the White House, to accelerate implementation of UNSCR 1325 across the US government and in civil society. That was accomplished. We did one, and then we updated the plan, and in my role at the Defense Department, I had a part responsibility for this portfolio. Some 80 countries now have their own plans. Some multilateral organizations have outlined specific commitments as well to advance the role of women in preventing and resolving conflict, including the African Union, NATO, and the G7. In the fall of 2017, 7 years after our commitment to our first National Action Plan, the landmark Women, Peace, and Security Act was signed into law. The act states that the policy of the United States, this is kind of remarkable, will be to promote the meaningful participation of women in all aspects of overseas conflict prevention, management, and resolution, and post-conflict relief and recovery efforts. And it details the required steps to report this policy. And as we talk, one profound contribution of the Women, Peace, and Security Act is that because it is a law, it should create greater likelihood of policy continuity across administrations, something we were lacking when we were operating under the National Action Plan. And for any of you who've I've spent time in any government, including our own government, you will know that having the long view, being able to plan against more than a 1 or 2 year time horizon is extremely important. This is good news for strengthening how the relevant U.S. agencies can plan, resource, and implement advancing women's roles in conflict prevention, resolution, and post-conflict or post-crisis relief and recovery across agencies, including state, defense, USAID, and the Department of Homeland Security, to name the lead agencies. And I will say, if any of you have been working in USAID, they definitely have the lead in this area already and have made significant progress starting in the last administration. Now, the Act requires I'm going to take you through some bureaucratics, which sound really boring, but when I teach national security decision-making, I always emphasize that you can have a great idea, but you got to get the process right as well to make that idea happen. So the Act requires a strategy, which has recently been issued, followed by implementation plans, which are in the works. The Act requires briefings to Congress 1 year after the strategy is issued on training related to the Act, and it requires a report to Congress 2 years after the strategy is produced, detailing measures of effectiveness in its implementation. Congress has built itself an oversight role that I hope it will exercise, and that should enhance accountability from the executive branch. While the promise of the Act is encouraging, one concern is that activities tasked by the law will remain in women, peace, and security silos. You feel those silos? I think we all do, as has been the case for the most part until today in most government agencies, despite the best efforts of those inside the government seeking to implement our policies. Broadly speaking, there's still very limited understanding of the Act's requirements outside of those individuals tasked with implementation. Another concern is that there will not be sufficient resources to advance policies and programming related to the Act. In implementing the law, the objective must be to integrate a gender perspective into all the relevant aspects of foreign and defense policy and to ensure the funding is in place to realize these objectives as well. Let me turn for a moment away from U.S. agencies and policies to the United Nations, because that is the body we look to for preventing conflict in more than a dozen nations, with tens of thousands of UN-hatted military and police deployed across the globe. And may I say, an issue that I have worked on for quite a bit of time in my tenure in government. The data here are not what we would like them to be, plural, right? Some 5.4% of military and police in peace operations are women. That's not an awesome number. The UN has recognized the need for more women, yet the rate of increase has been really slow. This past January, the United Nations released a new uniformed gender parity strategy which sets targets for the participation of women by 2028, including having women grow to 15% of military contingents and 20% of formed police units. And that may not sound like an ambitious goal, but at the rate we're going, those are very ambitious goals. Canada, do we have any Canadians here? Canada, thank you. Canada, working with the UN and other countries, is also leading a new program called the ELSI Initiative to develop, apply, and test approaches to help overcome barriers to women's participation in peace operations, and they are conducting specific studies now in partnership with a couple of UN member states to do that. Why does this matter? Women's inclusion matters for peace operations just as it can for stabilization operations, and here's why. Female security forces may have greater access to areas, infrastructure, and populations than men, providing them opportunities to engage with local populations and gather information. They can be role models for local women, and in some areas provide a greater sense of security for women and children. Data show that women's inclusion in peace operations and more broadly in the security sector improves accountability and decreases abuse against civilians. Norwegian Major General Kristin Lund, who was the first and thus far only female commander of a UN peacekeeping operation, has called women a force multiplier. I only have 5 minutes left, I must speed up. Noting the value of an integrated force to reach the entire society of the country in which the force is deployed. With these initiatives, there are opportunities in principle to lower the barriers to women's participation in peace operations. We need to know more and then to apply the lessons that are learned, which may require additional investments and some training, operational, and administrative adjustments. At the very least, there is attention to these deficits. Well, the data about women is important and we need more, but numbers don't tell us everything. As I said at the beginning of my remarks, the experience of women in telling us how they are leading and where they contribute, from nonviolent protests to conflict prevention at the local level to peace negotiations and advancing security directly, are important. And let me just give you a few examples, and there are so many, including your own research. Today, women have played a leadership role in the anti-government protests that have brought Lebanon to a halt, creating human walls between protesters and security forces as they seek to prevent their male counterparts from violence by the army and to help to diffuse tensions. Women have inspired the revolution and led the movement, which is about correcting the wrongs brought on by sectarianism, poor governance, and corruption in a system under which women disproportionately experience those injustices. In Syria, women have helped facilitate humanitarian aid access where convoys had trouble reaching their destinations, have staffed field hospitals and schools, distributed food and medicine, and formed an all-female police brigade with access to places their male counterparts cannot go. In Colombia, women have been a key part of the local security situation, meeting local ceasefires, negotiating with guerrilla fighters to lift roadblocks so aid could pass, and negotiating hostage release. Women have broadened the agenda at the peace negotiating table to include the rights of women and girls. In Afghanistan, we have the Deputy Chief of Mission here, and I hope she will talk to you a little bit more later about the vital Afghan Women's Network, where women have been involved in peace settlements at national and local levels, and I understand there was recently an all-women's jirga in Afghanistan, and you can hear about that later today. But did you also know some 40 women are members of, Afghan women are members of an all-female demining team in Bamiyan province? Operating in a country where only 20% of women are in the workforce, the composition of this all-female team is particularly notable. They've taken on dangerous and difficult work in a country that is one of the most heavily mined in the world. And many of them are primary breadwinners for their families. It's a great story. And there are many, many more stories. I don't have any stories today from Africa. There are many you can hear from SAIS Women Lead and Professor Wampmore. The point is this: we now increasingly have ready access to these stories, and that is something that is a development within the last year, within the last years, within the last 5 years, thanks to the work of individuals who are conducting research specific to women with a gender lens, as you have here, and to news platforms that highlight stories about women. I took my examples from Council on Foreign Relations Women in Foreign Policy program, I want to give a shout out to, and Foreign Policy's new Her Power website, which flags stories that are about women and also by women. As I said, these are representative but not comprehensive stories of women's engagement. There are many more, if I had more time, that I could tell you. We need to lift up these stories, to gather the evidence of where and why women are making a difference. We need to bring in sex disaggregated data is beginning to happen. We need to do the research. Your very own research can contribute to this field in a way that will further the case for advancing the participation and the protection of women around the world. So with that, I've given you a brief lay of the land on trends for women in the field, the state of play and the core policy of women, peace, and security, and a quick look at how women are engaged on the front lines and why it matters. Let me also say this to the students in the audience and to everyone here. You are entering the field of peace and security at an opportune moment for women. My perception, based on the pledge that so many of the presidential candidates have taken, is that there is more openness than ever to taking full advantage of the talent and perspectives of a diverse workforce, and I should not only women, but women of color. I hope you will learn from those who have come before you, to take advantage of mentors who want to help you, and through this learning, forge your own pathways. You need to listen carefully. You need to listen to what made our careers so special, what made them so wonderful, and in other ways, what made them so challenging, so that you can develop your own approaches as you move through, as you enter the field and you move through your careers. Yes, there are barriers, but more so, there are opportunities. The 2018 National Defense Strategy says we are facing increasing global disorder, creating a security environment more complex and volatile than any we have witnessed in modern history. Why would we not take advantage of the best possible talent and the broadest possible perspectives to address these challenges? Thank you.
And so if you would look underneath your chairs, I think the students have pleasant surprise for you. It's just something we want you to be thinking about. Some of these ponder points will come your way throughout the whole program, just to kind of, keep you reflecting on the theme and the various elements of the theme which we are speaking to. And so Giselle will introduce our next program.
Hello, everybody. Our next conversation is going to be Agents of Change, presented by our very own Dr. Sarah Jordan, a professor with the Energy and Resource Environment Department here at SAIS, as well as Ambassador Laura Holgate, who is a key player in the inclusion of women in the non-proliferation in areas of nuclear energy. And we're so happy and excited to have you and hear the conversation that's about to happen. Throughout the course of the conversation, we urge you to engage with our speakers through Q&A and Twitter via the handle that you will see on the screen, that is at Laura SH Holgate, and using the hashtag SWL Agents of Change. As for introductions, Ambassador Holgate's professional career is a testament to the theme Agents of Change. Between 2016 and 2017, she served as the U.S. representative in the Vienna office of the United Nations and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Previously, she served as the Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Weapons of Mass Destruction, Terrorism, and Threat Reduction on the U.S. National Security Council. From 2001 to 2009, she served as the Vice President for Russia and New Independent States Program at the Nuclear Threat Initiative. And between 1998 and 2001, she directed the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Fissile Material Disposition, along with the Department of Defense. Her commitment to advancing women's leadership in peace and security follow her to this day. And in fact, yesterday was the first anniversary of one of Ambassador Holgate's latest initiatives, which Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy, which is a group that aims to increase the visibility and impact of women in the nuclear field. Without further ado, please help me introduce Ambassador Holgate, Vice President for Material Risk Management at the National Threat Initiative, and Dr. Sarah Jordan.
Ambassador. Ambassador. We're delighted to have you. I had a bio prepared, but I think SAIS Women in the Lead did such a fantastic job. That's really wonderful. So I'm going to start off. So my first degree is actually in physics. So that's another reason, on top of working in energy, that I was particularly excited to be hosting you here. So given that, clearly it's a male-dominated field, and the more I looked at your what you've done particularly in the International Atomic Energy Agency, I thought about the topic of our session, gender champions as institutional change agents, and you've clearly been actively involved throughout your career. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this statement means to you, both in your role as a change agent, but also in watching women move forward and progress over time throughout your career?
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jordan, and it's wonderful to be with everyone this morning. Thank you for coming out and participating. The issues of change really have been part of my career all along, and trying to recognize what the opportunities are, sometimes that you don't even see coming. My professional career coincided with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the creation of a whole new way of thinking about threats from weapons of mass destruction. Instead of the strength of the Soviet Union being a risk to us, it was the weakness of that country as it was falling apart, to be able to control the materials and weapons that had been designed to destroy the US and our allies, and to shift the mentality from one of confrontation to one of cooperation around how do we manage those weapons of mass destruction risks. And so I had the wonderful good fortune at the very early stages of my career to see how the intellectual insights of people like Ash Carter and Bill Perry, who I was working with at that time, to be bold enough to make that shift can really change the entire course of history. If we hadn't come to that conclusion about that cooperative approach, then we would have still found, possibly even today, nuclear weapons in Ukraine, and think of how challenging that would be to US national security interests. So I had the kind of formative moment as a very young professional of seeing how individuals can really make an impact. And when I came to Washington to then try my hand at working, actually doing that work in that cooperative threat reduction area, I first encountered WISE, the Women in International Security, and Anne was one who introduced me to that group, and we later served on the board together. And I call that kind of work, yes, great, great swag there from yesterday. I call that kind of work side out and bottom up. It had to do with women building networks with their peers, building skills, creating informal and formal support mechanisms, doing mentoring, pulling young women up behind them, giving those opportunities. In some cases, as Anne and I will remember, maybe not for the two of us, but there was actually a shared pregnancy wardrobe that went around the Pentagon that was, work appropriate. And so those kinds of networks have sustained women, for decades, and have, even in the early 90s, helped bring a lot of women forward. And at that time, in the Pentagon, which is where I started my bureaucratic career, there were really a lot of us at kind of mid-management levels, which was pretty exciting. And but that really gave me the tools and the recognition that women have so far to go. We have so much to offer, and one thing that has really changed is that pipeline number that you mentioned, and 56% of graduates in international relations programs are women. So it's no longer enough to say, I couldn't find a woman to do the thing, whatever the thing might be interviewed for a newspaper article, sit on a panel, teach a course, lead a team. Those women are there, and they are trained, and they are ready. The question is, why aren't they progressing? And that's where you come to the institutional change and the need for individuals at the top of organizations to make commitments, to make a change, to enhance gender balance, as was mentioned earlier to enhance the presence, the voice, and the impact of women in the national security field, the international security field, and the field that I've been working in across a range of aspects, the nuclear policy field. And so that's what really connected with me when I went to Vienna as U.S. ambassador to the missions there. I was asked by the State Department to transmit or transfer a program that had already been begun by my counterpart, Ambassador Paula Hamamoto in Geneva, called International Gender Champions. And that grew organically out of a set of conversations that were being had among the senior diplomats and the heads of international organizations in Geneva that recognized that all too often the community, especially the panels, Geneva just really thrives on panels. The discussions were so imbalanced, and in both ways, in a very problematic way. If you were talking about hard security stuff, then, or economics, or the World Bank, and think about all the UN agencies that are based in Geneva, a lot of times you had all-male panels over and over and over again. But you also have organizations like World Health Organization, and so they would be, you have Human Rights Council, they would be holding panels on, women's and girls' health, or women, peace, and security, or different things, and then you'd have all women panels, and that's not good either most of the time. And so they came up with this idea that at their levels, at leadership levels, that they could make a difference in their own organizations, not just in the panel thing, which is, a symptom of the imbalance elsewhere, not necessarily the cause. But they decided to make pledges individually that they would not sit on single gender panels unless absolutely necessary. It's called the panel pledge. Sometimes the ambassador just has to go and be the ambassador. But a lot of times you have the ability to engage with the panel hosts, to connect with the people who are organizing the event and say, listen, I'm not going to speak unless you make the panel more diverse. Then they also made commitments to improve the gender balance within their own institutions, whether it's an embassy or a mission or an international organization, to make pledges within their own power to implement. And so that really felt like a model that could be applied in the nuclear policy world. And when I came back from Vienna in January of 2017, I was going to a lot of conferences and a lot of meetings, and it was, the Me Too movement was coming up. I mean, it was a very anxious time, I think it's fair to say, for women in Washington especially. And I remember, I said, this tool could help us. And I made a few comments in a couple of groups, and this incredibly talented young woman, Michelle Dover, who's the program officer at the Plowshares Foundation, called me up one day. She said, Joe Strancioni, the head of Plowshares, wants to talk to you about your gender champions idea. And I said, I don't have a gender champions idea. What do you? And she said, no, you keep talking about this stuff. I said, okay, so I'll go and I'll sit with Joe. And I sat down with Joe and Michelle, and they said, okay, so tell us more about this. And I described the Geneva piece, and they're like, well, so do it. Let's, design something. We want to support this. We want to make this work. And so Michelle and I got to work, and we did a lot of outreach and a lot of engagement with women's organizations that already exist, and to talk about, well, how do we not reproduce what's already being done and done well? How do we add to this? And it's really this top-down that we added to the side-out, bottom-up work that has been done for so long. The importance of getting the top individuals at organizations. And so we started recruiting folks to do this, and we said, okay, when we have 20 dedicated champions, we'll launch this thing. And so as it turned out, we launched a year ago yesterday, so this is super interesting to be here on our first birthday. And we now have 44 total gender champions from all over the nuclear policy community, and think tanks and activist organizations, in the foundations that fund them, in the professional societies in which women work, in kind of quasi-academic structures. We haven't yet broken directly into the academy, because we know that the discussions around gender in the academy are pretty fraught, and we don't want to do harm. And then just yesterday, we had a real breakthrough that I just couldn't be more proud of. Tom Mason, who is the director of Los Alamos National Laboratory, announced that he would become a gender champion, which is just amazing. And so what that says is, if you think about those organizations, those kinds of organizations, most of them are in Washington, but some of them are around the country. We have a little cluster in London. There's several folks in Vienna. And there's no limit to how this can grow. But you look at most of the heads of those kinds of organizations working in nuclear policy, nuclear deterrence, nuclear disarmament, nonproliferation, nuclear security, nuclear energy. These are men. And in fact, of our champions, which is already a self-selected group, 24 out of those 44 are men. And that really reflects, I think, the point that Anne made, is that as men are leaders, they are the ones who are responsible for helping. If you're going to have a mentor in this field, the chances are it's going to be a man. And so giving men the tools to do their work in helping create a gender balance in the organizations in which they have power is incredibly valuable, and we find it's very welcomed by the leaders that are working through the Gender Champions process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been fortunate to have mentors of both men and women. So if you have speaking to those men who support us in the field of energy and clearly more broadly international affairs. So I have more to ask you specifically about Gender Champions, but one thing that I have received some pushback on is, make sure that you don't make institutional change your main objective, because you clearly have, we all have roles within our workplace, so we have to make sure we get the job done. Can you speak a little bit more to balancing your really wonderful initiatives to promote gender diversity with ensuring, with how much of work that you have to do for your primary appointment?
Well, absolutely, that's, I have a job to do in managing the materials security program at the Nuclear Threat Initiative, and there's no question that that's an important piece. But I don't think that these things are separable, or that they should be separable, in part because of some of the experiences that we have as women that make us understand that there's a challenge, come out of those work environments. Anne told a story about, the Russian diplomat with whom she engaged. I have some Russian general stories of my own, but I don't want to just pick on the Russians, because there's plenty of, informal things that are problematic, that don't really come out quite so boldly, but that still add up to a set of recognition that you are the other. You are not the one that's there. Mm-hmm. And so if you can't find a way to deal with that while you're trying to get your job done, then it's not going to be successful. So for me, it's not a balance, it's an integration. And that's what we're really trying to say to the Gender Champions. I mean, you're going to have to hire people in your job. You're going to have to pick a panel. You're going to have to choose your mentees and your proteges. That's part of being a professional. And if you are not mindful about how you do that in a way that creates that space for diversity, then you're not doing your job. And so I see it not as a thing to be balanced one against the other, but as a thing to, how do you integrate a fairness, an open-mindedness, a diverse approach to the substance of what you're doing in your job.
I actually have to say I really appreciate that answer. So I hope that everybody in the audience does too, right? So I think that was really fantastic way to put it. I actually had a woman on a recent panel that I moderated suggest, hey, why don't you give like the Santa Claus question of, if you could do one thing, what would it be, right? So I chose to put this as if you had the power to make one change to advance the role of women as champions of institutional change, what would it be and why? And what political challenges do you foresee that, particularly in such a political field, and how might we overcome them?
Wow, what a great and generous question. If I had Santa Claus or a wand, I think it really has to be women in leadership positions at an appropriately balanced way. And I feel like I have to say it. I'm talking about competent diversity here. No one is talking about tokenism or people who shouldn't be in those positions except for that. And it's, on one hand, it sounds terrible to say that, but it's too. There is a history of tokenism and of women who've been promoted for things other than their talents that still sits in the background of certain people's mindset or in the lore, the folk history of the push for gender balance. And so I want to be very clear that I take, going back to that point about the pipeline is full, I take for granted that there are competent women available for any position that is going to be available, for any opportunity that might be created. And if there's not, then shame on us as a community, men and women, for not creating that competence and that capacity, especially as you move up in leadership roles. So I think, study after study after study says that what inspires young women, what helps them see their opportunities, is to see women who look like them in those leadership opportunities. So if I had a silver, a magic wand, I would, shake it across the leadership community of the international security world and have it be competently balanced, diverse in all the diversities, and in a way that is just like showing that this actually makes the outcomes better. Again, study after study after study has shown that the more diverse your team, the more multiple perspectives, the more different approaches to solving a problem you get, and the better the outcome. And when it comes to national and international security, I mean, why would we choose a less good outcome? I mean, these are the lives of, our countries, our neighbors, our allies, people all over the world. How could we not want the best possible outcome for these challenges?
Yeah, I think that's a great comment as well, particularly due to, we know that there are implicit biases even from reading CVs to, selection processes. So I think that might speak a lot to ensuring that the selection of leaders is very representative. Speaking of which, you held a prominent leadership role, ambassador, clearly, at the International Atomic Energy Agency. I'm not sure if we have any members in the audience who are, I see one at least, who's in energy resources and environment. So I was hoping you could explain a little bit more about your role at the International Atomic Energy Agency, what you did, and challenges to leadership, and also those things that just your accomplishments in that role more broadly.
Well, it's probably the shortest job I ever had. Thanks to the glories of Senate confirmation, I arrived in Vienna. And I see some other ambassadors nodding heads around the room. I arrived in Vienna in July of 2016, and because I was a political ambassador, I left on January 19th, 2017. So 6 months in Vienna is better than no months in Vienna. I'm not whining, but it was a pretty limited amount of time to make a difference. On the other hand, I had been working in the field associated with the International Atomic Energy Agency, or with a chunk of its work, for decades. So I think it was a welcome for the team there to have an ambassador who was already, kind of up on the main things and ready to jump in. I already knew most of the ambassadors in Vienna because of the work I'd been doing at the White House on the nuclear security summits. And so it was in some ways, it was a pretty easy transition, and I was able to hit the ground running. I would say there's two main topics that I worked on in that 6-month period. One was implementation of the Iran deal. It had gone into force earlier that year, And it was at a very interesting stage. I was not part of the negotiating team for the Iran deal, so I was not intimately into the details of that, but the International Atomic Energy Agency, of course, has a significant role in verifying that Iran is doing the things that it said it would do. And until recently, they've been able to verify that quarterly. But that was the first full year, and so Iran was doing a lot of the kind of beginning things that they had to do to kind of shut down and limit their nuclear activities. And those were things that had never been done by a country under international supervision, and they were things that the IAEA had never supervised before. And so they were learning new techniques. And here where I really got a chance to see the power of our U.S. national laboratory system in support of global goals, because we had experts in our laboratory system who understood how do you shut down a centrifuge plant safely without creating literally like spinning tops. When you stop a centrifuge quickly, it can spin out of control and actually hurt people. You've got to be careful about this kind of thing. How do you, destroy the plutonium production capacity of a reactor? How do you, manage the import of a certain type of carbon fiber, some of which were allowed and others of which weren't? And so these were lessons that had to be learned all along. And sometimes the Iranians didn't themselves know how to do the things that they had signed up to do, like at a technical level. What does that really mean? How do you translate that? And so we would have, conversations with experts from the IAEA about how do we do this? How can we tell the Iranians how to do this in a way that will meet the letter of the agreement? And the Iranians were at the same time, from a political perspective, trying to see, okay, are the boundaries that the other members in the Iran deal set, are they going to really keep those boundaries? Are we, and so they were doing what I call the velociraptor thing. If you recall from that scene from Jurassic Park, where the velociraptors are like testing the fences to see where they're weak. The Iranians were testing the resolve of the countries that were part of the Iran deal to see, even if it doesn't matter right away, like with heavy water, are we going to push back? And so I was part of those conversations. I mean, most of those were happening capital to capital, which is another very fascinating trend in diplomacy today, when you have such swift and complete communications between capitals that sometimes bypass the diplomats. I knew I was never going to have the cutting edge policy, but I was there to engage in the day-to-day relationship with the people in the IAEA, with the other members of the Iran deal, other countries who were involved. We had monthly dinners with the 6 ambassadors who were part of the Iran deal to talk about, what did each of us heard, where were our capitals coming from, what were the big issues that we saw coming forward for the IAEA. So that was a fascinating time to be there. The other thing that was going on at that time was kind of the first phase of the IAEA struggling to set up its leadership role in nuclear security. So when I'd been at the White House, I came on just as the National Security Council was building the infrastructure for President Obama's nuclear security summit process. That is, you may recall, that was one of the pledge that he had made as a candidate. It was brought forward officially in his famous Prague speech in April 2009. I joined the White House in July of that year, and we did the first nuclear security summit in April of 2010. The largest gathering of heads of state and government in Washington, D.C. ever at that time. And then there were 3 subsequent summits, one held in Seoul, one held in The Hague, and then the final one again held back in Washington, D.C., and broke our own first record at that point. And then there was a decision made by the leaders involved that 2016 would be the last summit in that format, and that the agencies, the international organizations for which the summits were designed to strengthen, it was their time to shine. And so the IAEA had that winter, the second of their International Conference on Nuclear Security, that was which had a ministerial section that was meant to maintain some of the political momentum from the summit process. And of course, there was the annual negotiation of the nuclear security resolution at the annual meeting. And so we had lots of nuclear security stuff happening as the IAEA tried to kind of figure out where was it gonna kind of settle in that post-summit environment. What were was the political priority among the member states gonna stay high? Was the interest from capital gonna stay high? What role would the missions play in Vienna? And so I had a chance to do as much pot stirring and cheerleading and spine stiffening as I could to keep that interest high and to keep the process moving forward within the agency.
Well, if I ever have a 6 months experience where I manage to do so much, I think my career will be successful. It was a really wonderful summary. I'm going to ask one more question actually before opening up to all of you, so make sure you think of up some questions for the ambassador. So could you, so we have a lot of aspiring young professionals in the room, and in addition to other distinguished professors and practitioners. I was wondering what you could, what advice you have for all of us, both men and women in the audience, for enabling gender diversity, but also institutional change making based on your experience.
Well, what inspired me so much about the presentation, the little video that was just shown, was that y'all are demanding it. You know it needs to happen, and you are expecting it and holding your institutions accountable for it. And what's great is that you have faculty who are responding to that demand, who are supporting that demand. And so that I think is already so far ahead, as Anne mentioned, of where these conversations were when we were in grad school. So I think that's the first thing, is make your interests known and use the power you have as students and in a way customers of your university experience to hold your institutions accountable. But I think there's also just so much informal support that can be given to each other in just the dynamics around daily interactions in the classroom, outside of the classroom, to be sure that women have a chance to be heard, that their opinions are valued, and that they get to own those opinions, that the space is made, that people are called out for bad behavior, whether it's man-interrupting or whether it's on the more serious end of sexual assault and sexual harassment in the system. There was something that I benefited from without even knowing it when I worked at the White House, and some of you may have seen the story that came out in, I think, 2015 or so, that some of the senior women in the White House system had decided to do what they called amplifying the voice and amplification. And I was amazed. I had amazing good fortune in that everyone between me and the president was female, except briefly except for a period of time with Tony Blinken. But I worked for my issues. Some of my issues ran up our chain through Susan Rice as the National Security Advisor, and her deputy was Avril Haines after Tony left. And then some of my other issues ran up through the Homeland Security Advisor, so Lisa Monaco, and her deputy was Amy Pope. And for a period of time, I had Liz Sherwood Randall as my, kind of interstitial person. And I had, at one time, out of the 7 people on my staff, I had 6 women. Not because I said I want 6 women on my staff, but as each position opened up and I did a competition and I interviewed people, it turns out that the right person for that job at that moment was female. And then I looked around and oh my goodness, look what we just did. And so for them, everyone, between them and the president was female. And that really, those female leaders really took their responsibility seriously. And so they said, if we're gonna be in a room and, a woman puts an idea on the table, we're going to call it out and say, hey, that was a really great idea that Julie said. Does anyone want to build on that? Or, to, be able to recognize and give women the space and the credit. And this is what I mean by the informal stuff, where unconscious bias starts to play a role, but where they were able to really identify when good ideas were coming out, and to be sure that they got the credit and they got the space to then be amplified and worked on. Because no idea arrives perfect out of the mouth of its offerer. It only improves by the discussion. And so to be sure that those ideas get their place to be improved was part of their goal. And so I think that's certainly a role that men and women can play for each other in formal discussions and informal discussions. And so those are just a couple of ideas. The other point is, being peer coaches for each other. If you're nervous about giving a presentation, ask a pal to watch you and to give you feedback. Find a pal that's really good at that, and give them a chance to play that informal mentoring role. Ask for help in your writing process, in different, whatever it is about your skills. There are people in your cohort who are good at those things. And that gives them a chance to help you, which makes them feel better, makes them a better professional, and it improves your own game. So I would say, ask for what you want and be generous with what you can do.
Yeah, learning how to ask is a big point and very important. You won't always get yes as an answer, but asking, you'll never know if you can get something unless you ask, right? So, and also really wonderful points for all of us. I wanted to start to open up to any of the questions. I don't know if we'll be bringing the mics around or not yet. So please do raise your hand if you have any question about the ambassador. I'm sure you're happy to speak about your career as well as your experiences in international relations. So do we have any questions from the audience? Oh, we have a lot. Wonderful. Okay. I think the first hand that came up is, I think, Cindy up here. I can't quite read. Okay, wonderful.
All right, thank you so much for the presentation and the discussion.
Oh, please do introduce yourself.
Ambassador Cindy Kohrville, retired. I was the first U.S. ambassador to the African Union. Worked in defense and intel as well, and in academia. So I thank you all for the contribution. So if I could interject for both women, because you intersect, especially in the line of work in your field with nuclear and with defense, we tend to use language, as you said, hard security issues, soft security issues, and language does matter. Did you find yourselves in the position to say, I can't change the whole history, but how do we interject this? And then you both talked about women, and it's not just you, but in general, we say women, then we say women of color. And I find that artificial divide, and I know it is not intentional, but whether it's in the media or in academia or in the workplace, when we say women, we tend to say white women, and it's code, the unspoken code. And then we have to say, oh, by the way, women of color. And so for women of color, you can't unzip the suit, but also ideologically, not just in terms of color, all women don't have the same ideological orientation, and I like that you pointed that out. And then the third question, when you amass this group of women, and I know Susan Rice, what was it, and you talked about they had the right qualifications. How do we overcome the ideological differences between women? Because sisterhood is not automatic.
Those are great questions, and I am well aware of my privilege as an Ivy Leaguer, as a white woman in this field, and I will say I've never, in terms of hiring or being promoted, I would never say that being a woman held me back. But it's in the little stuff that starts to be a challenge. And so I absolutely resonate with the point about, there is not a female view. There are female views. And I get really frustrated. I think Ann and I were both interviewed for this book called the study called Consensual Straitjacket, which had a wonderful pull quote from one of the interviewees. It was done by Heather Hurlburt at Center for New American Security, and it was focused on nuclear arms control kind of conversations. And it's somebody said it's not, you can't just like add estrogen and shake. It's not, that's not what diversity is about. And so that's why I try to talk about diversities, plural, to try to recognize there's the visible or identity diversities, but there's so much diversity of thought that we really have to ensure gets in the room. Now, it's easy to say if you are not diverse, if you're leaving 50% of the people outside of the room or whatever percentage you're talking about, then by definition what you have left is less diverse. But I think it's important to honor the diversity of that cohort that then needs to be in the room. I think that's part of why they say that you have to kind of get to the 30% of the people in the room need to be women before you really start to get the benefit of women's involvement and women of all types of their involvement in the process, because those 30% of women are not all going to have the same perspective. So the part of it I think is the notion that when they speak up, they are not speaking for all women; they're speaking for themselves. If there were just one woman in the room, then we're all going to say, "And what do you think?" And that's not helpful either. And so I think those are some of that's why numbers really do matter.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I know there's Will in the back there, and then I know there's some behind our first question. So Will first, and then we'll come to the central speakers as well.
Thank you for coming, and thank you for everything.
Will, please do introduce yourself.
Oh, hi, my name's Will, as Professor said. I'm a first-year student here in the ERE program, studying energy resources and environment. Could you just for a second pretend you're like a grant-making associate at a family foundation, right? Okay. How would you pitch to your pretty old-school board about the importance and the strategic vitalness of investing in women leaders in issues or sectors that haven't had a historically strong presence of women leaders, as well as in regions that are, not very gender equal, to say the least? And how would you pitch to that board?
That's a great and challenging question. Unfortunately, it's rarer and rarer. I mean, as I mentioned, a number of our gender champions we started off right with the philanthropic community because we knew we needed to do that. So we have Bartan Gregorian at the Carnegie Corporation as a gender champion. And so just as an example. So I really think it has to come down to doing research, at a level of specificity I haven't done sitting here, but whatever the foundation is focused on, really finding the research, because I'm sure it's there, about the better outcomes that come from this. I mean, there's an important argument about equity, but if we're already where we are after all these years, it's more than just a sense of fairness that says women need to be at the table. It's got to be, you've got to make arguments that go beyond that. And so to me, it has to do with making the outcome better, because that board is already there to do a job. And if you can say, I can help you do your job better, we can do things as a foundation that will get us closer to our foundation's goals. And there's just, whether it has to do with what the organizational culture of the foundation is themselves, or whether it has to do with their grant making. I mean, that's some of the most powerful grant pledges that our gender champions from the philanthropic community have made, is to be sure that they are balancing their grant making in terms of the dollars and the number of grants that they make, and in terms of, for example, Plowshares Foundation just did a small grant effort in which they said you can only apply if you've never applied for a grant from us before. And so it wasn't to say we're only going to let women go, but since usually it's the men who are on the names, the front names on those grant applications, that by definition ruled out a whole bunch of people that were kind of the frequent flyers in their community. And so there's a whole bunch of things that you can do once you've made that decision that will help demonstrate and improve the outcomes. One of the things that Carnegie Endowment, or Carnegie Corporation did was a very extensive polling of their, I don't mean like opinion polling, but like data collection across all of their grantees on a range of practices having to do with the gender balance of the organizations to whom they were giving, or the degree to which a set of analyses was being done that in ways that included a gender analysis approach. And then they publish that information. And so then when they do it again in a couple of years, you'll be able to see, did they do better or did they not do better? And so it's that public accountability that I think also has to be part of any conversation. And that's what the Gender Champions process will be doing, where the pledges that everyone makes are public. And if you want to see them, it's at gcnuclearpolicy.org. And you can see, you click over the face of the champions and you see the pledges that they've made. And then we're going to do a report early next year on how progress has gone against those pledges. Some of the other techniques that foundations have done is when they learn about a gender problem with a donor, that they will engage that donor, or with not a donor, with a grantee. They will engage that grantee, and in fact, my organization did that. We don't do grants like big grants, but we have partners with whom we work, and we've had conversations when it's come to our attention that there's been a problem, and it's not like, fix it or we'll cut you off, but it's like how are you gonna do better? And my own organization had a problem with an employee that was ultimately, well, not ultimately, very quickly, frankly, terminated for sexual misconduct. And we had a whole set of activities inside our own organization to improve our collective sensitivity around sexual harassment, around bullying, around diversity, around organizational culture. So there's a lot of tools that can help an organization improve.
Yeah, this is a wonderful toolkit that you're speaking of, and I agree with the accountability and ensuring that progress is tracked. Now, I believe there is a young woman here behind the ambassador, but can you raise your hands too for the others that wanted to? Okay, so first the young woman. Yeah, we have, let's do a couple of questions. So starting here. Sure, sounds good.
Thank you. Good morning, Ambassador Holgate. It's so wonderful to hear your story and certainly be at the Johns Hopkins School and have this type of conversation regarding our women. And the young lady who was in the video earlier, I think, made it crystal clear that we deserve representation because we're here too. And so I've been working with young activists in Sudan. My father's from Sudan. I was born and raised in the United States, but women were at the forefront of the revolution in Sudan. We went out and we protested, and women also died in this revolution. However, when we came to the negotiating tables, women were not represented at those negotiating tables, and they're still fighting to be included in these ministries and these departments that have yet to be determined who's going to be in these leadership positions. So my question for you is, are you making partnerships in Africa, in countries like Sudan, who are looking towards leaders in the United States and around the world, really, to help reach back and show them and help them, not tell them, but show them some of the roadmaps to making sure that we have more inclusive societies?
Well, Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy is not active in Sudan, I think, because there's really not that much nuclear going on in Sudan. But the model is available, and I think the model from which the Gender Champions in Nuclear Policy was pulled from, which is the International Gender Champions model, I think there's a lot that's there. And because it has ambassadors in the UN city, and so that initiative has grown through all the UN cities, including Addis, and Nairobi as well. And so there are undoubtedly Sudanese leaders in those capitals participating in those processes. And so they have access to the International Gender Champions model that maybe they can bring to the home front of the challenges that you're talking about. Because I think this notion of senior leaders of any gender taking responsibility for the gender balance within their own organization and doing so in a public way, that's a universal model that can be applied to a lot of different challenges.
Okay, I think this gentleman over here, please do introduce yourselves as well. And then we have a young lady over here. And then we actually still have about just under 10 minutes. So if you have a question, we might be able to sneak one in one after these two as well.
I think, okay, it's working. Good morning. My name is Sue. I'm a second-year conflict management concentrator here at SAIS. I'm also a son of an IAEA nuclear safeguard, and I think that's our connection we have here today. Thank you for your time this morning. My question, of course, I'm an aspiring academic, so I need a footnote. Dr. Carol Cohen of UMass Boston wrote a special article called Sex and Death in the Rational World of Defense Intellectuals, and she discusses that there's a techno-strategic rationality behind all decision-making, and this sprouts from, say, the defense ministry being run by men for decades, and maybe even centuries. I can't say for sure for some ministries, but with that kind of mentality in mind, do you believe that for women to progress further than their levels, as you mentioned before, they reach a certain level and then are static at that level for a while, in order for them to progress further, is it something endogenously changing that needs to happen, or exogenously, or is there a mix of both that women and men can unite to change and bring this equality or parity to this kind of community?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I'm not sure. I don't have a perfect answer, but I was so off-put by that language when I was a grad student. I was studying international relations. Well, at the time they called it Defense and Arms Control Studies at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Political Science Department. It's now the Strategic Studies program because arms control fell out of favor a couple times since I left. But yeah, it was throw weight this, and you know, it was a very gendered. I hadn't read Carol Cohen's book at that point, or her article, but when I read it, I'm like, oh man, I get that. And especially when you're talking about nuclear deterrence and nuclear weapon strategy, it really is, I call it a through the looking glass experience, because you do have to suspend a human rationality to be able to think about what does that deterrence, I mean, how do we contemplate the mass death of millions of people on purpose, you know, in this extremely abstracted way, because it has to be, because otherwise your humanity can't take it. And so that was not a place I wanted to live my intellectual life, and so, you know, the broader challenges of proliferation were less problematic for me personally in that respect. But again, back to the point of, you know, women have a range of different ideas. There's some incredibly talented female, you know, military strategists. I worked with several of them, you know, Elaine Bunn, Amy Wolf, you know, people who have really, Michelle Flournoy, I mean, who get that language, who speak it, who dominate it, you know, who own it, and that, you know, that's where they've chosen to make their difference. And, you know, the more you have those more, I mean, it comes back to this diversity point. The more women you have in that, the more they will be able to, you know, adjust that abstraction, I think. And I think it's quite interesting that so many, if you just fast forward to, you know, a couple of years ago and the negotiation of the Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and you look at the photos from the room, I wasn't there, but I looked at the photos, so many women by comparison with other, you know, nuclear disarmament negotiating processes. And I think it's because they started that process with this conversation around the humanitarian effects of nuclear war. Now, I don't think the treaty is a good idea, and I'm not here to advocate on behalf of the treaty. I mean, the fact that it kills lots of people, yeah, that's kind of the point of deterrence. So I kind of didn't resonate with the notion of, oh my God, did you know nuclear weapons are going to kill lots of people? It's like, that's the point, and we shouldn't use them. So I'm not defending either deterrence or disarmament at this point, but I was a little bit not wowed by it. But I thought the fact that they originated with this humanitarian effect issue and drove that into this prohibition issue and how female dominated that conversation was, I thought was really striking and beneficial as an intellectual growth effort. It may kill the NPT next year, but that's a conversation we can have in a different venue, maybe.
My goodness. I now have another 10 questions, but I'm going to make sure that the last question goes to our audience. Thank you. Do introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Cathy Matsui. I'm a student at the British International School of Washington, and I'm writing an essay about women occupying positions of power. So my question is, what are some barriers you experience in your position of power? Like, have you faced any discrimination from some of your colleagues, or like, have you been attacked by people saying that you are a woman and you should not work in that position? Thank you.
I've never had anyone tell me I shouldn't be in a position because I'm a woman. And I was lucky in my very first mentoring relationship was with Ash Carter, with whom I worked at Harvard in the early 90s, and then I went to work in his team at the White House. At the Pentagon when he was an assistant secretary, and Anne was part of that team for a while. And what was really striking to me was, having observed him in Harvard. I never perceived a gender challenge from him, any kind of overt bias. When he started to assemble his team, he had 6 people immediately under him who were 50-50 men and women. He put women in senior positions, at levels below that. That was happening in a lot of other parts of the Pentagon. And so it was not at all a surprise to me to see the decisions that he made as Secretary of Defense to open combat roles to women, to lift the trans ban and those kinds of things. That felt to me very on brand. And so I'm aware that by my affiliation with him, that gave me a little bit of a protective bubble against some of the hard stuff. But when I was out from that bubble, or when people didn't know that was a bubble I lived in, certainly being young, female, political, civilian in the Pentagon, when you're dissed by a general, who knows which of those 4 things it was. So that does happen. I did experience that. And that's why I say it's these informal kind of, I wouldn't even call them insults, but just like stuff where someone talks over you in a meeting, or when someone assumes you need to be sitting on the back row instead of at the head of the table. When someone takes your idea and presents it as their own. Little indignities like that, when you get sat, way at the end of the table instead of in the middle of the conversation. And the assumptions that people make about your status, certainly as you rise in status, assumptions that people make about where you fit in the hierarchy, not matching where you really fit can be a problem. And I'll just bust on the Russians here a little bit, because I used to do a lot of negotiations with them, and I would be leading these teams, and I would have colonels on my team, and senior civilians. I was often the young one, even though I was the boss. And so I would take the position at the center of the table, and then the Russians would start talking to the male interpreter next to me, because that was who they assumed was in charge. It just didn't compute to them that this would be a female leading the team. And this is where where it's important to have people have your back. My teammates, my older male teammates, saw that the U.S. position was not going to be as effective if they didn't understand that my word was where the buck stopped. And so they would go to their counterparts in the coffee breaks and say, hey, be sure your boss knows she's the head of Dell. She's the one who's going to sign this agreement or not. She's the one that has the responsibility here. So, be sure you recognize that power dynamic. And so those are the kinds of experiences that my career has brought me. But I know so many women who have had so many more challenges, either from bad personal connections and sexual harassment and assault and discrimination, well beyond the kind of day-to-day indignities, as I'll put it, that I've been blessed to be limited to in my experience.
So we'll be ending, but not quite on that note, but to highlight how important the ambassador's recommendations were about informal networks, the power you all have to ensure that a gender diverse workplace. So, and in doing so, this is a SAIS Women in the Lead conference, but in calling out women leadership, Chi-Chi, I hesitate to use your last name, but we are friends. And my colleague here and professor has done such a lovely job in preparing this conference and inviting such distinguished speakers. So let's thank our speaker.
Thank you very much. Thank you so very much, Ambassador Holgate and Professor Sarah. Thank you. And so next on the program is embedding empowerment into everyday life. So we here in SAIS Women Lead, we are committed to walking the talk, right, of strengthening students and non-students' inherent capacities and promoting their skills sets, as well as amplifying their voices, as we have heard. And so what we're going to do is to kind of flip the model and move the podium down to the audience, right? But before we do that, before I hand over to the team, the students are right about now are handing out the next ponder point. Not quite? Okay. Point taking. All right, so without further ado, I will hand that over to Emily and Shisal.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. So to mix things up, since this is an audience-based session and going to be a little bit more engaging, if all of you wouldn't mind taking your chairs and shuffling 90 degrees so we're all facing each other, almost as a semicircle, but just 90 degrees, so if you're on this side this way and this side this way. Thank you. So the purpose of this session is to just reflect on the past two presentations and examine how they actually apply to our everyday life. And we want to engage the audience and use this time to share your reactions to the presentations, to the ponder points, and what still needs to be addressed for the realities of the obstacles you face on a day-to-day basis. With that said, does anyone want to share something that resonated with them from the two presentations, from the PowerPoints, or any other thoughts? This is a time to share your thoughts and really have a platform.
My name is Daphne. I'm a second-year student here. I thought the presentations were great, and I felt very empowered, but then at the end, I realized that within these walls, I always feel kind of empowered and supported somehow, but then when I walk out, and in DC, there are like more dangers, I guess, and threats, but like I'm from a small city in Bologna, in Italy, and when I walk by myself in the street, I know that I'm more scared than my male friends, and like my brother, my boyfriend, when they walk around, I know they're not scared, but I am. And so I think, I don't know if this applies to, or can change that feeling that I have every day, every night when I walk around by myself. So that was my thought.
Anything else? What? Oh, okay.
Hello? Okay. Hi, my name is Emily. I'm also a second-year student. I was in Bologna with Daphne, and I just resonate with what she said, and I think one of my questions that I got, just given the kind of climate we're in from the administration, what's being projected about women in the news and what's being projected about reproductive health rights, for example, these issues that are going on right now in the climate, I think really feeds and perpetuates these feelings. So I was just wondering how you encounter that maybe in your day-to-day, and if this is something that can be changed from the top down from you leaders.
Yes, I can resonate with both of your comments in terms of the daily vulnerability of knowing from a security standpoint as a woman, you are physically more vulnerable because you are seen as a target. And it doesn't matter your title or your position. When you walk out the door, they see a woman. And I'm not saying that for you to be scared, but I'm saying for you to be sensitive to your environment, know how to navigate it, know how to protect yourself, and be sensible enough to know that sometimes, because we haven't arrived yet, it might not be safe for you to walk on the streets by yourself. I mean, and that I can be very angry about. You know, when there's a beautiful moonlit night and you want to just be out there and take a walk, and you know, my internal voice said, now you know, it is not safe for you to do that. You can do it at your own risk. But where can I safely do that? How well have I learned my self-defense lessons? What are the ways that I can navigate the environment? Or I will tell you, even with the title of ambassador, I've had, and you two women, it sound like you had a better environment than I did at times. And I am not bemoaning that. Thank God you did. Because if you never have to engage it, wonderful. But I had a guy pound his fist on the table. And, you know, and I said, you know, thank God for my home training with my mother. I sat back and I watched. You know, and I said, you know, he really didn't just do that. And I found that I had to use my inner voice and say, let me stay calm here. Because I'm going to be the angry black woman. So, you know, there are other things that I can't control for how I'm going to be perceived in the room. I'm going to be the angry black woman if I say nothing in the room, and then I'm the tall, angry black woman. And today I don't have the 4-inch heels on, but that was a tactic for me to walk into the room. Because if the man had to look me in the eye or I had to look down, that changed the total dynamic for me in the room. Or my more petite friends had to choose another approach. Men don't have to use these same tools. And we haven't changed enough yet, so know what the tools to use to navigate the room. You know, I think that's fundamentally important. So, you know, I share in your thoughts of having to think about what could happen to you, and why should we have to even think about that?
I already talked a lot here. I don't want to dominate. I want to hear from all of you. That was a wonderful answer, and it brings up another thought that I had, which relates to something that Ambassador Holgate said about being in the bubble with Secretary of Defense Carter eventually became the Secretary of Defense, and then what it meant to walk outside that bubble. So in a more figurative way, not what is it like to be inside a building and then out on the streets of Washington. And speaking from my own experience and listening to Laura made me think about how important it is to have our networks. And you will grow those networks organically and naturally over time, but you also need to think about what kind of networks you want and what kind of networks will benefit you. Because the more people that know you in the room, what's your name? Yeah, Daphne. So someone, just as Laura said, is going to say, you know that person in the room or at the table is going to say, Daphne just had a really good point, and I'd like to build on that. So I think there's a figurative way, too, of thinking about this that's really important for everyone here.
Hi, okay. My name is Christina. I'm a second-year student here. I think it's really easy to talk about having networks and sort of working together as women, and I think that's a nice concept. But I think after moving here to DC, and it's not just amongst women, but it seems as if we're all running this marathon, and it's this big competition, and I think at times it can be almost more competitive between women because there are so few spots available for us at these higher levels. And so I felt at times here that, yes, I have wonderful people who bring me up. Daphne's my roommate. We talk together, we work together. But at times there are women here who might not like to see us succeed as much as they want to see themselves succeed. And that's to say for men as well. And I just wanted to know, have you encountered that, and how do you work through that?
I'm happy. I just one thing to always keep in, so you can't change everybody, but I would also remember to, one, focus on your own successes. So the more you focus on somebody competing with you, the less you're focusing on your own successes. So no matter what, even if I feel that way, I always focus on the products and publishing or finishing something or participating in a project. But also to not let that change the other really important things that the speakers were talking about enabling others.
So prior to embarking on my master's degree at Penn State, I worked in television news for 10 years. And I left. I was a homicide reporter in Houston, Texas. So talking about violence and talking about women, I was a lot of times on the scene of the crime, but we've moved on to competition and unfair competition. I left the industry because I wanted to be in activism and advocacy, but I can say that, working in television where you're dealing with, I think all women are incredibly talented and beautiful and bring so much to the table, but who are motivated sometimes because they haven't grown, perhaps, I don't know, to a place where, maybe they want to contribute more. When we were talking about, here I go, but when we were talking about competency, and not just being diverse, but being competent and not tokenism, you can never compete with anyone else but yourself. You have to want to be better and get better and improve your skills. And you can't be distracted by women or men, really, who want to compete with you for the wrong reasons. You just have to love yourself and grow, and you can't be like them. You have to uplift other women and find partners. And I think that's infectious when you find women who love other women and want to see us succeed and have seats at the table, then you don't let that distract you. And it can hurt, especially in terms of friendships and sometimes losing, or I shouldn't say losing, because sometimes you have to separate, right? So that other people can go on to grow, but then maybe you'll reconnect or find each other later, and you have to just stay strong and continue to uplift other women around you. I think that's the best model for success.
Okay, hi, my name is Maria. I am a second year here, and I wanted to know if you've ever encountered impostor syndrome and how did you handle that in the workplace? Because I know that as soon as I arrived at SAIS last year, I didn't even know what that was until I started questioning my ability and even my spot here. And so I wanted to hear, how does that relate as someone who will be going into the Foreign Service? How do you tackle that?
Hello. Before we get a response, could everybody raise their hand that has felt this at one time? Because I think it would be a lot of us. So I just wanted to emphasize that we're all feeling a lot of the same things.
All the time. All the time. And I'd be lying if I didn't say it wasn't true. As I moved through my career, sometimes reaching points in my career where I felt like I really knew what I was doing. I've been doing it for a long time, and I was the go-to person. But then if we want, you want to grow, go on to the next thing, get outside your comfort zone, as we all need to do, it just happens. I don't know that I have terrific advice except harken back to what was just said, to try to get back into my own head and to say to myself, okay, I wouldn't be here if someone didn't want to put me here. There may be some people around me who want me to fail, and that does happen in this field. Let me be really clear about that. It's not a squishy environment all the time, and to look for allies and to get back into your head and just know that this feeling that you have is held by lots of different people, probably women more than others. I don't know studies about this. I can't say, but is that true? Yeah, there are studies that show this, and that it happens at all levels, at every stage and age of our career. If that's any comfort, we've all pushed through it, so you can too.
Yeah, just to build on that, I've always counseled people that I mentor that if you're not a little bit scared by your next job, you're not reaching high enough. So that's a part of that is recognizing and being okay with that imposter syndrome, knowing that it will decline over time. And for me, the dissipation is similar to just doing the job, being the competent person that, I'm the one that knows my shit, and I'm in the room because no one else knows my shit as well as I do. And unless it's one of my staff, and see, once you become a boss, then that has its own imposter syndrome. But then you don't have to know everything, because if you've done your job, you have a talent bench behind you that you want to give them a chance to shine and help them overcome their imposter syndromes. So that's another level as you progress in your career. But yeah, I've had imposter syndrome since I was a freshman at Princeton, coming out of a giant public school in Kansas City. There was no one else like me on that campus. And boy, did I not feel like that was the place. But a semester in, it was absolutely the place. And so there's time and getting comfortable with that feeling and finding your path through it is a lot of what will get you through. So you'll do great. I'm so glad you're joining the Foreign Service.
So I really like that comment. That makes me feel a little bit better, because coming from Canada with a degree from Memorial University and University of Calgary, when I got to Harvard, everyone was like, all my degrees are from Columbia. And I was like, Memorial University of Newfoundland? Where I got my physics degree. And people, not everybody was as receptive or congratulatory of a physics degree from that institution. But I'm just going to say one thing. You are here. You made it here. You're clearly going into a fantastic job. And that's, you made the Foreign Service. You did it, even being here, yeah. So I didn't raise my hand, but I have to say that I've recovered. I actually don't feel, again, imposter syndrome that much right now. I hope that doesn't come back. But I used to have it quite badly, and all I can tell you is just keep succeeding and keep moving forward. So even if you feel like that, I don't know how many times, and I'm sure all the speakers that I've been thrown in water and not known, not being sure that I could succeed, but just keep going for it.
Yes, just quickly, this is such a highly competitive town. And it is literally dog-eat-dog all of the time. So that's another pressure of just being in this environment. But yes, Opelousas, Louisiana, this is where I come from. And so every now and then that little girl in my head, with my very southern name of Cindy Lou, says, what are you doing in the room? And then I have to remind it, I have to own that room. And you're probably going to have to put in some extra work. So those long hours at the Pentagon when everybody else was gone, or in DIA, the Defense Intelligence, or in the White House when it's 11 o'clock, as these ladies know, or, at night, and you're just leaving, and then you're back again at 6 or 7 in the morning. The confidence in the room, and you just have to breathe, and you're right, you do have to repeat, and we do have to say, that Ambassador Holgate's comment, lift each other and lift the men in the room too. Because, 9 times out of 10, they're just as scared as you are. We've got another layer to deal with, but you belong. You definitely belong.
Before we continue, I just wanted to tell us that there is also lunch, right? So you can grab lunch. This is going so well that obviously we can, keep going for a couple more minutes, before we have to break for the next panel. But while we do that, I think this is a really nice setting to eat lunch. I think digestion goes better in this kind of settings. Having said this, I also just wanted to quickly say that another thing that helps with the imposter syndrome. And this is also why it has come out, it's become a thing, is discussing with peers and finding sounding board, people you trust, you feel you trust. You've got to find somebody you trust, right? If out of the whole world, there's nobody you trust, you might want to go, talk to a psychiatrist, not a psychiatrist. Therapy helps also, right? So if you can't trust anybody, then trust a therapist. You have to talk to somebody because those moments where you articulate those thoughts helps, right? And then what Sarah also said is that you made it to the day, right? Today is a victory. It helps with fighting the imposter syndrome is knowing that you showed up today, you're here today. So the fact that you're here today is a success. You're here because you deserve to be here. You made it here. Nobody brought you here. Well, I mean, we flew on the wings of people that had passed, right? But we're here, nevertheless. And so that helps with fighting imposter syndrome. And as you saw, everybody, almost everybody here, at one point or the other, even men, right? It's just that men have a better way of dealing with imposter syndrome. He's saying, what is that again, right? But meanwhile, internally, they're feeling like, should I be here, right? But outwardly, they're saying, I think you're taking my spot. Do you mind moving, right? So women just deal with it in a different way. Nevertheless, I think it's a universal, it's a human condition. It's not just you. And so, again, there is lunch, right?
So my comment is actually a little bit before the imposter syndrome conversation. So I really want to respond. First, my name is Amy Breslow. I'm a SAIS alum. Also used to work for the International Development Program. And I'm so thrilled. This did not exist when I was at SAIS. And it's so wonderful to see all of you here. Earlier in the conversation about competition, I have a really good friend who works at the Pentagon and works in women, peace, and security. And she and I were having a conversation about this, kind of within WPS, but broader. And she said two things that really helped me. And I'm, further along in my career, but this stuff is still, you're always kind of struggling against it and pushing against it. And the first, this idea that she and others call perceived tokenism. Someone made a comment and said, we're struggling for one or two spots. That's just our perception. It's not as though there's one or two spots that says woman here, the rest are men. They're just spots. The fact that we think that only one or two of them are going to be open for women, that we have to overcome that. And as opposed to seeing it as only one or two spots for women, no, this is open. It's just we have been conditioned to see that perceived tokenism. That's number one. Number two, which is connected, we got into this, I'm just going to use the word patriarchy. We got into this really interesting discussion about patriarchy. And the way that she described it, which I found really helpful, patriarchy, it's a system. It is a system. And one of the ways that this system is perpetuated, and let's be clear, it's not just men who are perpetuating the system of patriarchy. We have to own that women behind us currently who, there's many, many reasons why people buy into it. Sometimes people just don't think they have another choice. But one of the ways that the system is continued to perpetuate is the system tells women we have to compete against each other. That is a very, very strong message of patriarchy. Well, we have a choice to not do that. We can be breaking the cycle. We can be the people who are breaking that cycle now. And maybe it may not, let's say, impact that very job that we want in this moment, but we can be the people who are breaking the cycle to make sure that it is not moving forward. And that helps with our confidence. That helps building our networks. I will tell you, I worked for 10 years at the State Department, and every single time that I saw somebody amplify someone else's voice, bring somebody else out, they made an ally. Do not underestimate your small kindness, your small whatever in a meeting. you can gain an ally for life. And we're not talking about big, shiny things. We're talking about stuff behind closed doors. That stuff really matters. To this day, I now trust people, whether they're at state or whether at NGOs where I worked, because of something very small where they had my back or they said something for me. And that's the sort of stuff, it builds up and builds up over days and weeks and months and years.
I'm a second-year IDEF student. Thank you so much for organizing this. I'm learning so much today. I just wanted to make a quick comment on Professor Holgate's, Ambassador Holgate's panel pledge. The panel pledge, I mean, we could see here, right? We had just 2 men today in the conference. He just joined in, but how can we break this panel pledge? I mean, chime into it and try to, men can also learn about women's leadership, right? But we never see them coming up to these conferences. It's always women. That is one. And the second comment, thank you so much. I totally understand the patriarchy system. And for example, sometimes when we are in a social setting and we joke about some things, there are so many jokes which are towards women, like, oh, come on, you can't live this, don't be a girl. And we don't really react to it. I personally did not used to react to it until very recently. It was like so much, yeah, man, I can't do it. It's not, I can't do it. Come on, brother, help me out. But why do we take it so much by default? How can we change this? Thank you.
Okay. He keeps whispering 3 seconds to me when the mic turns on. So anyways, kind of building off that, how do we overcome this perceived fear of failure? We're always, both men and women are scared to pursue something because they don't want to fail, and I think sometimes women disproportionately feel that more. And it's just, how did you overcome fear of failure, and how do you build those networks that are needed, both men and women? Don't know?
I haven't. You just push forward. And if you've never failed, that's an amazing person. But I have failed, but the thing is to pick yourself back up, and it's hard. Some days it's really hard. But having that close friend that you trust, who you know is not going to push you further down, or your family, is important. But I would love to say I've never failed, but of course I have. And some of my failures have led to my best successes. Because I'll use the example, had I gotten tenure, I would have never been Ambassador Kohrville. And I loved my academic experience, but I understood the politics of tenure and the environment. And I said, you know what, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. So failure's not all bad.
I would like to also speak on the failure thing. I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army. I'm also a mom, and I'm here as an MIPP doing this thing in a 1-year thing. And yeah, and it's hard. And the thing about the feeling of failure is it's gonna come from different sources as you keep getting older. So right now, I feel like I'm failing at being a mom when I'm at school. And when I'm being at home, being a mom, I feel like I'm failing at school. So you're just gonna have to, like she said, just push through it. You will fail, and it's gonna hurt, but people are gonna count on you to show up and be your best. And you have to perform. You have to, because the work that you're gonna do matters, and it's gonna affect people's lives, whether personally at home or at the workplace. So, yeah, I'm sorry, you're gonna live with it.
So to the point on how do we get men involved in these conversations, it comes back to that leadership and that modeling point, and to why we knew in Gender Champions you needed to go to men to show that. And if it would have been great if we'd had a couple of our Gender Champion folks here talking about why they as men saw benefits from women's leadership. I think that there needs to be more of that. And so I'll just echo the challenge, but I think it has to do, that that particular issue, I think, really starts at the top of, you know, if who do the men that we want to be here see as reflecting them in this conversation, and why aren't they here? On the point about failure, one of the things that I say to my teams when we're working on something that isn't for sure going to happen, where we're really, you know, we're trying to achieve an outcome, but it's questionable, I say, you know, we're going to do a no regrets strategy on this. We're going to make sure that if we come out the other end of this and we haven't succeeded at the thing that we want to do, that we've done everything we can think to do it. And sometimes, you know, if we're getting close to that point where we're like, oh man, this is not going to work, that we just stop and say, okay, is there anything that we haven't thought of? Is there anything that if this fails, we're going to say, oh damn, if only we'd done X or Y. And so that can be, you know, replicated at a personal level as well. Is if I don't get this job, is it because, you know, have I done everything I can think to do? Have I written the thank you note? Have I, you know, provided follow-up information? Have I, you know, worked my network? Have I, you know, whatever it is? Not to say that that failure is then your fault, but then when it happens, you have no regrets about how you prosecuted that goal. So that's something that I find has helped me.
So just a couple of points on failure. First, building off the question as a leader, one of the things that I had to remind myself to tell my teammates a lot to promote creativity was that I had their back. It was going to be okay. I got your back. If I'm asking you to do this, if it doesn't work out, I'm taking responsibility for it. I'll give you credit if it works, and I'll take responsibility for it if it doesn't. And I think feeling so comfortable with that is derived certainly from my own experiences, maybe where I had it and I saw how empowering it was, and also when I didn't have it and how fear-making it was. So I think, so that's one thing, and I hope that you'll encounter other people, I know you will, in the system, there are lots of them who give credit and take responsibility. The other point on failure is that we only, you know, the way to get better at something is to practice. So the more you can try to do something that doesn't feel good to you in an environment where it matters less, the more ready you'll be to do it in an environment where it matters more. And sometimes you don't have a, you know, we don't have a choice. I can still remember when I was in graduate school and we had a group project, and I volunteered to make the presentation, and I was totally terrified of public speaking. And I'm sure I didn't give a beautiful presentation. I wasn't all that well trained on it, but I felt like if I failed there, it just wasn't, I knew it just wasn't going to matter as much as in the outside world. So practice, practice, practice. Try to make the little mistakes and not the big ones.
At this time, we're just going to encourage you to get lunch. This isn't the end of these conversations. We just wanted to use this as a platform to begin these important conversations. So we encourage you to mingle with each other, keep talking about it, and the next panel on maintaining confidence in a male-dominated work environment will be at 12. So thank you. Thank you all for your participation. Hello, everyone. If you could all take your seats, I think we're going to get started with the last panel of the day. Thank you so much for joining us throughout the day, and those of you just joining, thanks for coming. We appreciate it. On behalf of SAIS Women Lead Program. So, I would formally like to introduce and welcome the panel on maintaining confidence in a male-dominated work environment. With us today, we have Julianne Smith, the co-founder of LC Wins and senior advisor to the president and director of the Asia program at the German Marshall Fund. We have Danica Starks, a SAIS alumni, class of 2001, so thank you for joining us, and current senior policy advisor at the U.S. Department of Commerce in the Office of Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia. We have Dr. Mary Ellsberg, the founding director of the Global Women's Initiative at George Washington University. We have the Honorable Ambassador Paula Dobriansky, and former Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs. And we have Ambassador Cindy Kohrville, the first U.S. ambassador to the African Union. Moderating the panel is Professor Liesl Hintz, Assistant Professor of International Relations and European Studies at Johns Hopkins SAIS. Thank you all for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you all, to all of you for coming. I know that we have lots of events going on, that it's a super busy week, so we're thrilled to see people turn out to discuss the topic of maintaining confidence in a male-dominated environment. I want to thank Emily and Giselle and Chi-Chi and everyone else who has put this together. I think it's an extremely important initiative. I think this is a really impressive conference, and I look forward to the discussions that we're going to have. I think I've heard that it's been an anecdote-filled day, and I think that's a wonderful way that we learn from each other. So I'm going to be asking our panelists to share some anecdotes. And I wanted to start with one of my own. I'm particularly honored to be invited to moderate this panel because I think I came a little bit late to seeing gender. I think that I grew up with a lot of privileges, a lot of identity privileges, that didn't necessarily lead me to considering that gender was affecting the way in which individuals were interacting with me. And so I remember in my first year at George Washington University as a PhD student in political science, one of my female classmates turned to me and said, "Oh, isn't it so weird to be in this environment?" I'm like, "Do you mean because it's cold in here?" Like I couldn't. I was freezing. I was like, "Yeah, that's bizarre." And she said, "No, look around. There's 12 guys and there's 3 girls." And it was 3/4 of the way through the semester, and I hadn't noticed that. It hadn't really been salient in terms of how I negotiated my environment because, again, I think because of other identity privileges, I hadn't necessarily run into that. And I think that, perhaps comments that I'd heard, I interpreted as compliments as opposed to things that were sort of pointing out, things that perhaps shouldn't have been said. But from that time to having gone through 7 years of grad school, 3 years on the job market, and now 3 years in a tenure track position, I can say that I very much see gender, and I am extremely grateful for all of those who've worked extremely hard to advance the role of women, particularly in the peace and security fields, to get us to the point that we are, but there's a lot more work to be done. And so I think we're incredibly grateful that we have these individuals here to share their experiences. So I wanted to see if you'd be willing to kind of, however informally you'd like to, whether it's in the organization that you work with or the broader field that you work with, kind of map out what the gender balance was. So for me, it was kind of 1 in 4, and I hadn't noticed that. But if you could sort of map that out and how that affected you, if it did, when you first entered into your position. So how did that gender balance affect your ability to perform, how you felt about your ability to perform and do your job, and so forth? Julie, can I start with you?
Sure. Thank you very much.
I don't think so.
Hello? Might have to shout.
No, you're good.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
I think it's on now. Okay. Thank you for moderating this panel. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks for all of you for sharing a Friday afternoon with us. So I guess I've got a similar story in the sense that I entered the field and I too wasn't thinking that much about gender. Early on in my career, working at a variety of think tanks, certainly in college, it didn't resonate with me. And if anything, if it did, I just thought it doesn't matter, it's irrelevant, I need to move on and focus on my work and the substance and foreign policy and national security. But once I got into the Pentagon, it's kind of hard to miss. And I had the good fortune of working for Michelle Flournoy, who was undersecretary at the time. She had brought in a number of women into Senate-confirmed positions, a number of senior leadership positions. So in a kind of shocking way, there were occasionally meetings at the Pentagon that were all women, and it was amazing, and people took note of it. But there were plenty of other meetings where you'd be the only woman in the room. And it's not just about being the only woman in the room, it's understanding the network of men in that room, that they're hanging out together, they're going for drinks afterwards, they might be golfing or going to the gym or playing basketball, they're sponsoring each other, they're mentoring each other, they're sharing inside track information that's just generally useful, they're introducing each other to other people in the field. There I started to feel I'm missing something. Also, I had my first child while I was working in the Pentagon, my first son, and I was in a rush to get out the door whenever I could. I was shying away from certain assignments, so I was self-selecting to kind of I was present doing my job, but the minute I felt like I had a break, I was scurrying away, missing the social engagements, missing opportunities to connect with my colleagues and some of the men and women. And so that became apparent. I also then went to the White House after that and was Biden's Deputy National Security Advisor, and then had access to various meetings in the Situation Room. And there were women that would come and go, but depending on the nature of the meeting and the subject, there were many times when I walked into the room and I was the only woman in the Situation Room, and that's a tough environment to be in. You're looking around the room, admiring everyone's experience. There is a streak of imposter syndrome that runs through my system on occasion where I think, what are you doing here? And so it's tough. There, again, you see the relationships. Sometimes notes are passed, and you wonder, will I ever get one of those notes? Is anything coming my way? So yes, there were many times during my service in government where I recognized something that I had either been denying, ignoring, not encountering earlier in my career. It doesn't mean it was all-encompassing, that I felt like I couldn't do my job. I still was able to lead. I found ways to speak up, to find the confidence, to lean in, to assert myself. But just to say that it has become much more apparent to me after serving in government that there are issues we still need to work on. Very last point, social media was not ever present early in my career. Now it's a very big part of what folks do and their identity and how they promote their work. I do find that that environment that's very male-dominated is a new battle space for women in the field of national security. Lots of women are on Twitter and social media. They do a great job also promoting other women and promoting each other. But for me, that still is a bit of the Wild West, and we have more work to do.
Absolutely. I love that you sort of pointed to the social networks that are taking place in the room, but also the social networks that are taking place outside of the office that you're not necessarily either included in or able to participate in. Social media, I think, is huge in terms of it being a male-dominated environment, in terms of sort of the visceral or violence in the attacks, I think, that women often face on social media. As someone who's very active on social media, I can attest to that. So thank you so much. So that's a perspective from the Pentagon. Danica, I was wondering if you'd sort of speak to some of those issues in the Commerce Department and whether or not you saw a similar gender balance, whether you saw some of the same obstacles. Can you speak a little to that?
So I wouldn't say it's much about the Commerce Department because it's a huge organization, diverse. I would say it's more my field being a Russia-Eurasia specialist. Okay. From the time that I started until only very recently, it was not just male-dominated, but much older male-dominated. The study of Russia, Eurasia really sort of went on a decline for a while, so there weren't even a lot of younger men. So I found myself not only being sometimes the only woman in the room, sometimes one of the youngest people in the room, sometimes the only person of color. So to be honest, it would have been a privilege to just worry about gender. And to this day, when I got the invitation to speak, I'm like, well, I don't even know what that means to just worry about whether or not I'm a woman. Yep. And so that idea of feeling like I did not fit at all. Yeah. I'm too much, everything I do. And so I tried early on to to hide myself. Lots of gray boxy suits and only wearing black and minimal jewelry and, my hair like a bun. And miraculously, nobody ever still mistook me for an old white man. It's the worst Halloween costume ever, is being a black woman in a Russia environment. But what I found, though, was I actually found a lot of allyship among some of the ethnic groups that I worked with. For many who don't know, so during the breakaway of the Soviet Union, you had a country that was dominated by Russia, but then you have all these other nationalities from Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, other places. And what I found was they actually related to me sort of as a minority more so than even being a woman, because a lot of those cultures are very male-dominated, and in most of the time, they would not include even their women, but they would include me as sort of an exception. And so I actually found allyship with a lot of people who didn't look like me, who might have still been male, but they brought me in as sort of being different. And their respect actually helped me to earn the respect, in a lot of cases, of the American men in the room. So yeah, so to this day, it's something that I shouldn't say I struggle with, but I don't think I struggle necessarily with it anymore. But that feeling that I'm never going to look like that. I'm never going to look like all the heroes of national security. I'm never going to fit that mold, and sort of realizing that at a certain point, you know, it's a losing game.
Yeah.
And so whether it was gender, race, anything, to just stop trying to worry about that, I'm going to have to make my path based on other things. And so I mean, I occasionally still wear gray, but I lost the ability of trying to just look like an older man. Yeah. You know, it was never going to happen. And even today at 42, you know, there's still this, sometimes treated as if I'm 22. I think being women, you know, until you get to a certain age, there's still this sort of treating you like a girl and, you know, somebody's secretary and, you know. So I don't know, maybe my next thing will be to just, you know, try to look older, come in, you know, with a cane or something, and maybe that will be, but so yeah, so I wouldn't say commerce was actually the problem. Okay. It was actually my life in the field in general.
Okay. As someone who studies and is fascinated by identity politics, I am so engaged by everything you said, from trying to, because identity is malleable, right? And complex and overlapping and can be activated and more salient in certain circumstances, right? You're aware that you're a woman in certain circumstances, or your ethnic identity or your race can come up. But that we can affect that, or we try to affect that. And I know that dress, for me, is a big part of that. That even the way that I speak and the way that I present myself, I think, is often maybe trying to blend in or fit a particular standard that I may never be accepted as. So I really appreciate how you incorporated sort of your field of study and being in sort of an Eurasian environment and how that affected it. I want to then shift to someone who focuses and has done a lot of advocacy for women. So for Mary, so a lot of your specific focus has been on public health and domestic violence and women. So kind of comparing the other stories, the other anecdotes and narratives that have been shared, is your experience quite different because you are working in the field of women's issues, or is it kind of similar in terms of the challenges?
Well, I think it's different for a few reasons. I may be the only one who's never worked for the US government. I've worked for the Nicaraguan government and the Swedish government. Most of my career has been either as an activist, public health, but community level practitioner, then researcher and advocate. And as in my biography, I lived for 20 years in Nicaragua, and I went there during the 80s, during the Nicaraguan Revolution. And that was a very macho time. And I went there already as a young feminist, but as a North American who was already, you know, suspect because of that. And feminism was seen, literally, it was called a petty bourgeois deviation. Wow. Probably, we don't say that very much anymore, that language, but it was like machismo. Machismo is, you know, yeah, if you can go too far in one direction, but then feminism is like too far in the other direction. And I think I so badly wanted to fit in that I kind of just let that conversation go for about 10 years during the 80s. And then kind of got back into it because right after the revolution ended with a new government, the women's movement started to grow and became really vibrant. And it was a lot of women who had been part of the revolution but felt that their issues were never taken care of, that it was always about, everything was about, you know, defense and production and, you know, raising the economy. And if women brought up domestic violence or sexual assault or any of the issues or child support or the issues that were really affecting them, that was considered, you know, not important, and you're sort of, you know, you're getting off track. And so in the 90s, I had the luck of being in Nicaragua when the women's movement became the most important social movement. And then went back to university, got my PhD in epidemiology, and did my research on violence against women. largely because we needed a law. The women's movement had developed a law on domestic violence, and we were getting no traction with politicians. And they said, if we don't have numbers, you know, forget it, we're never going to support this law. So I did this prevalence study that showed that 50% of women had experienced domestic violence, and that was really important for the law. So I'd say from there on, my working environment has been almost exclusively women, and where the issue has been, although in my office, for example, we have two men who are fantastic, 3 men who are fantastic allies, but it's definitely women-dominated. And I think that the issue has been, over the last 20 years, to put into the mainstream the kinds of issues that we think are important. And, you know, public health just never took violence against women as a health issue at all. And it wasn't until we started doing this kind of research and showing how common it was and how it affected everything that public health people care about. It affects maternal mortality, infant mortality, mental health, low birth weight, all these different issues. So I'm constantly working on figuring out what do others think is important, and how can I connect the issues of gender and gender inequality, and how does that affect those other issues. And I think that's a lot of what we do with the Sustainable Development Goals, is showing that goal number 5 around gender equality and women's empowerment isn't just by itself something that needs to be done, but it's a prerequisite for so many of the other goals of eradicating poverty and hunger and improving health. So that, I think I do come at it from a different lens than others.
I appreciate this perspective so much in terms of how often, you know, so-called women's issues are kind of marginalized or put in a box and say, well, that's not, you know, it's not hard issues, it's not important issues. I teach a class on politics of protest in Europe and Eurasia, and what we often have seen, so I can speak to a cross-national context, but that's very prevalent, that trend. Some movements have been more successful in bringing them to the mainstream, so I think you're to be applauded for your work on that.
If I can just add one thought about that piece, what I think has been really important is that, as in so many other areas, your science has to be better than anybody else's, because you're being looked at, all of our research is looked at very critically with a real fine-tooth comb. And if I say openly that I'm a feminist and an epidemiologist, you know, people are just, they really bugs them that I say that I'm a feminist at the same time, and they'll really go at the science. And I've had people say to me, wow, you're actually very professional, or you're not like one of those shrill feminists. And,
no, I think that speaks to absolutely a common experience in terms of the bar having been set higher, the expectations higher, being scrutinized much more closely. I think built in, even maybe unconscious biases about how women can be as scientists, or how women can engage data even. So Cindy, I want to turn to you and kind of pick up on what Danica was saying earlier about how her experience with international interlocutors kind of was shaped and shaped the way in which she was received and was able to contribute. I was wondering, since you're the first ambassador to the African Union, if you could speak a little bit to whether you had discussions with any of the women that were your interlocutors, or were you the only woman, or sort of what was that environment like? What was the balance like? And what were the perspectives from other countries that were being shared in terms of whether gender played a role?
Thank you. I was very fortunate in going as the first, that I had been the senior director and special assistant to the president at the White House before. So I had a network and a base before going out to the African Union. So I was a known entity. So the African heads of states who I had met prepared their people to say, she's coming. So that was a wonderful and very unique experience. So the work I actually did at the White House was foundational. So you're setting the agendas for your region, you're briefing the presidents, and I was also very fortunate to have 2 national security advisors who were very supportive. So both Condoleezza Rice and Steve Hadley, you know, they would open the door, but you had to be able to stay in the room.
And Condi said that to me. She said, I've opened the door, but I'm not going to be here, so can you hold your own in the room? So she was sextate when I went over at the same time. I also was very fortunate that, as I said, the African heads of states paved the way. And the US was the first country to recognize the African Union. So that was on my watch as senior director, drafting that letter. So, okay, so, you know, we had lift. And it also brought lift to the institution. And there, one of my colleagues there was the ambassador from Uganda, who had been in Washington, D.C. when I was at the White House. So I had a partner in crime when I hit the ground. And the Ethiopian ambassador to the African Union was also a woman. So there were these three women who partnered together. And I'll give you an example of a situation where this was one of the times where there was real lift in the room. We were going to, Ethiopia had intervened into Somalia in the diplomatic terms. And we were requesting support because we had had a US cargo plane that had crashed, well, no, was shot down on the runway in Somalia. And we needed to get to the plane, and we needed the assistance of the Ethiopian government and their helicopter and support. So long story short, the three ambassadors went, and then the minister of Uganda, who was coming to support, and my military liaison, who, great Navy, you know, captain, good tall Anglo-American, at least 6'3". And so we were in the room. So this was, you know, the women in the room. And the reason I'm talking about the captain, because he made a faux pas, a diplomatic faux pas. And he said, when Ethiopia invaded, and the three women and the minister of Uganda, the male, going like, oh my God, we just lost that helicopter. And he didn't do it in a malicious way, but he just, in diplomatic ease, didn't say what we needed to say in the room. And so the Ethiopian chief of defense there, and I knew we just lost it. So, and I said, oh, no, 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 he didn't. And all of the women immediately did this. Of course he didn't mean that. And the general got up from his chair and walked to the other side of the room, and then he came back, and he put a map, and he put the map on the floor. So I got out of my chair, and I knelt down at the map, and I pinpointed the key areas of where we needed support and why we needed it, and then the general got on his knees, and the other two women got on their knees. And I'll say, long story short, we saved the day. So the dynamic of those women, and I had their support. And then the non-observer countries, there was a core group of about 10 women. And so I was very fortunate to go into that environment at a time. Now, you still needed to know your stuff when you walk in the room. And as you said, I couldn't unzip the suit, you know. I'm black. You know, I'm a woman, and I never wanted to take the suits off, except sometimes I would have liked to have been a little bit invisible in the room. And yes, I wore my 3-inch or 4-inch heels to walk into the room. You know, there was a flash in the lipstick because I'm a woman from the deep South, and I wasn't giving up being that part. You know, I am a girly girl, as some people just say. But you know, I'm a girly girl who likes to play with all the big toys.
Nothing wrong with that.
And I came into government as a GG11, leaving academia, having taught 10 years. And I went into defense intelligence. So for academia, I had crossed over to the dark side. I was the first PhD, black PhD, to be hired in the late 90s at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now that, you know, I'm tired of being first, I must admit. You know, because from 8th grade on, one of the first little black kids to integrate the schools. So, you know, growing up under Jim Crow laws. So, you know, all of these things. So never the luxury to, as you say, sometimes just be Cindy. And that's a rare, rare luxury that you get. And ideologically, as, you know, I grew up with strong women, so there was no choice. You know, so at 15, I was the secretary of the adult NAACP. You know, I was on picket lines as a kid, you know, so the activism part is still there. So theory to practice is fundamentally important. And then graduate school in 78, went to Denver. Well, I'll back up. It was one of the first blacks in law school at LSU. And the first day in my civil law class, he said, blacks and women don't belong in law school. So I'm going like, you know what? I really don't belong here, do I? I stayed a year and decided, you know, I really don't need to do this. And then spent 8 years getting a PhD, but who knows? But I enjoyed every moment of that. So going to Denver, there for the first time in 1978, there were 4 black women brought in. And that's the largest number they've had since in a PhD program. So, you know, I'm sorry that there are going to be more first, and you in this room will be among the first. So coming into DOD as a political military analyst, I spent more than the 8-hour day. And when the colonel said, Cindy, I will sit down with you and go over the orders of battle. Now, I knew guerrilla movements because that's my area of specialty, and terrorism and liberation movements, but I didn't know the US military. So I have to thank DOD foundationally, and Intel, which is a whole nother rough cut than just being DOD. I had to learn new cultures, new languages, and I had to be able to go toe-to-toe. So I had a PhD coming in, and I was told I couldn't write yet. I'm going like, what do you mean I can't write? I have a certificate. You know, I was like, forgot myself. I'm going like, okay, remember you learned how to say yes, ma'am, and no, sir, growing up in the South. So just revert back. And I said, oh, no, no. So the activist in me said, you know, I need mentors, but more importantly, I need patrons. And someone in power, both men and women, who will open a door. And sometimes you will never know their name. And they did, so I did get to publish. And I was told another time, you have to go take the Africa 101 course. I'm going like, well, what part of this? Why am I doing Africa 101? PhD, I've taught for 10 years before coming in, political science. And so I said, not a problem, I'll go take the course. They sent my name in and resume. The guy said, can she teach the course? That did not win friends. It made me an even, as we all know in here, bigger target coming in the room. And so when I should have been automatically promoted, and I out-published and did everything in the agency. But that being a woman, I didn't want to let go of it. I never had the pleasure of having my own children, but I have many children from teaching. But I respect it. Being a feminist, I came to using the name late. I was a womanist first, because there's a whole hierarchy of political ideology. And then a group of us, black women, did a book called Black Feminism with Dr. Stanley James. And then I went to the other end of the spectrum of being a Marxist feminist. But then the Marxists weren't dealing with race and weren't, you know, or ethnicity or culture. So ideologically, I found that problematic, so I borrowed. And then there are class differences. So always being, you know, of the feminist ideological orientation, not always comfortable with the different camps. And you know, when you're in the military and you're in military institutions, being able to do a briefing and know the language, so that got me the respect. And with the African heads of states and the other, you know, I had their respect, so their ambassadors were going to respect me. And I also was the United States. At the end of the day, no matter whether I was black or a woman, I was first the United States of America. And you knew when you walked in that room, you carried that. I think the most off-putting were my European male counterparts. Those were the hardest one. And I remember even at the White House, and then I'll stop, and this guy, and I got to be good friends, my French counterpart. And here's where I chose not to respond. I had slacks or whatever, and he said, you know, you look like a much younger woman. You have more space between your legs. And all the women, and you know, all the women in the room know exactly what I'm talking about. Oh, man. I think it's the first time I've said it out loud. I said it quietly, and that's why I'm not giving any names of people, because he is a good person. And I just said, you know, let it go.
Yep. Picking your battles, I think,
Yeah.
is a really important aspect of
So,
that.
so gender, feminism, class, all of those, there's no one or two variables. I do take a more holistic approach that all of those variables and intervening variables are critical at play.
Absolutely. I think, the concept of picking your battles is a really controversial one, right? Like, shouldn't we always be on the front line? Shouldn't we always be pushing back against these slights? Shouldn't we always? But it's exhausting at sometimes. And you have a lot of different interests that we have to weigh. If identities generate interests, sometimes our identities generate conflicting interests. It's tough to be all of those identities at the same time. I love that you talked about your firsts and that, congratulations on all of your firsts, but that it's exhausting to be first. But that one of the things that seemed to sort of facilitate that, at least with the African Union, is sort of the official, the office, right, that came with it, and the country that it came with it. So Paula, I want to ask you to pick up on this a little bit as the other ambassador in the room, in the sense of, because I've talked with a lot of my PhD colleagues who, and luckily the stigma is changing. You can now go into DOD, you can go into some of these other, you don't just have to get a tenure track job. It's also because the academic market is totally changing, by the way. But my women colleagues in DOD will say, because they have a PhD behind their name, because they come with some kind of official stamp, that has gained them recognition. Julie, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this as well. In the DoD environment, but Paula, did the office that you bring to your work, did that facilitate it sort of for you? Did that ease the path, or did that have no effect in your case?
Well, first, let me say thank you to the organizers. I'm delighted to be here this morning. I have a lot to say after hearing the comments of my colleagues up here. Yes. No, but relevant to your question, and also just some of the things that each and every one of them have mentioned that I can say I identify with. But let me start with this because you asked about my PhD. Actually, I feel I was very fortunate, and I was going to share with you my first job, my primary job in government, and in national security. I felt, wow. I worked at the National Security Council on the NSC staff at age 24. It was a dream job. And I thought, wow, I'm only 24 years old and I'm a full-fledged staff member. At the time, in the Reagan administration, and I'm dating myself, but in the Reagan administration, you didn't have the titles as it exists now. And I'll just give you a contrast. At the time I was in the Reagan administration, we only had 33 professional staff members. There were 4 of us in Europe, 2 on East. I was on the East side, then Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and then 2 on Western Europe. So 4 of us, 3 men and myself, and age 24. And then the number of the staff, as I said, was 33. Now I know that, yeah, I'm looking at you, Julie, because I believe in the Obama administration, I think it crept up to like 400 even. So why I only mention this, I was also working on my PhD, by the way. I had finished everything except writing the dissertation. So I was working at the NSC. I was there late at night in the office because, by the way, we didn't have computers then. So, so I'm there on the typewriter, believe it or not, and working out my dissertation. I don't think it necessarily genuinely mattered having the PhD. In fact, usually when I've addressed students, they will ask, do I really need to get a PhD? I don't think so. I do think, my own personal opinion, I think a master's and a specialty in an area is a good thing in terms of advancement. That's my own personal view. But PhD, unless you really want to go into academia and teaching and have that behind you. But nevertheless, it was important more for my family. My father was a professor. He had a PhD. And so speaking of firsts, I was the first in the family. So that was important just for my family. And I did get my PhD while I was working at NSC. You may know the name Samuel Huntington. He was one of my advisors, and Adam Ulam. And I went up to Harvard and had gotten through my orals. But the reason why I begin with NSC, and then I want to mention the position that I held as Undersecretary of State. But at NSC, you know something, I never felt that, or really thought about gender. Even though it was me and 3 other people, it was to me at the time more about substance, but more significantly, I felt where I had to pull my weight was, and you mentioned it, age. Because I mentioned I was 24, I wasn't grilled so much about having a PhD, but more, well, what's your experience? And, well, what did you bring to that judgment? And the good news, though, in this, you know, you get a mixed environment of anyone who you deal with. I found that I had mentors, and some mentors who surprised me. Mentors who were in the military, who actually were the individuals who promoted me and advanced me. And if I made a mistake, a few times I think I had my own, if I could say, bit of bias, thinking, oh, I bet he's going to think this way. And on the contrary, actually, there were a number of individuals who were the individuals who really went ahead and had promoted me, and who were very specifically military officers working at the, for example, at the NSC. But in this case, it was, to me, more about age and proving yourself, but not about my being a female. Okay. But I will say that as an Undersecretary of State, I noticed during 2 parts of the George W. Bush administration, my first boss was Secretary Colin Powell, and then my second boss was Secretary Condoleezza Rice. And it was interesting because 2 parts, I think, in both cases, they certainly placed a premium on women. And I look at women in the Foreign Service and women who had also political appointments in the State Department, and then also women who were in the civil service and also looking for advancement. I think that in each case, there were ways and means in which they were advancing women. When I look at the numbers, I originally wanted to go into the Foreign Service. I didn't. I went to the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown. I didn't do it, and primarily because I did feel that there were going to be some knocks, and I thought, I'll take the risk of being a political and trying to pull my weight that way. But when I look at when I started my career and where it is now, there are so many women that, I mean, ambassadors in the State Department, the roster, I mean, has just, I also believe, I don't know the precise figure, but I know that it's pretty substantial in terms of the number of women Foreign Service officers, because during my time, the balance was, women were definitely outbalanced. But what I wanted to mention is, as an Undersecretary of State, I remember the first term of the administration, there were you have 6 undersecretaries. 4 were male, 2 were women. The second term, by the way, 4 undersecretaries were women, 2 were men. So I think there are great opportunities that do come. I think knowing your substance is important. You don't need that PhD, but knowing your substance, having confidence in yourself and your beliefs, looking for mentors, which was mentioned here in a number of cases, whether men or women. In my case, actually, as I said, I've been appreciative. There have been a number of men who specifically have opened doors and who were real advocates for me. And then also, don't be deterred at all if you're younger. You know, again, you should hold your own because you do have something to contribute. And I'll end on that note. I was amazed when I came in the Reagan administration, the gentleman who unfortunately had to leave, but his name is Richard Allen. You may know that name, some of you may not know the name. But interestingly enough, I think he served at like age 33 as National Security Advisor at the time that Kissinger, you know, was over at the State Department. But you know what? He had a real look that we need to have younger people, that it's not just about age. You know, younger people are going to bring a new dynamism, a new outlook, and really fresh experience. So I think also as you factor in how to work in, you know, an environment where you are immersed with a lot of men, think about what you bring to the table and how you distinguish yourself. That's what should be uppermost in your mind.
Oh, outstanding. Before I turn it over to the audience, because I know that there's certainly a potential for a lot of questions here, I wanted to let you know we have a little bit more time than we'd originally thought. So we can go actually all the way up until about 10 to 2. So don't worry, I'm going to make sure that we have time for questions. But I just want to pick up, you know, Paula, I think it was really a fantastic way of drawing some of these themes together, that a lot of our speakers so far have talked about the concept of allies and mentors and identifying those who can, as you're saying, sort of lift you up, and those who can open the doors and be that support system that I think is really important. Another person that has participated in some of our SAIS women initiatives, Amanda Sloat, who has also served in the Obama administration and the State Department, writes, I think importantly so, writes a lot actually in USA Today about the need for more women in the State Department, the need for younger people to join. So there are a lot of advocates and allies out there. This is a fantastic panel, but we've got a lot of others out there. I want to turn specifically to the concept of confidence, the question of confidence. And maybe we'll start with Danica and then move down the panel. Ask if there has been a specific anecdote or incident that you want to share where your confidence was maybe shaken, where you were called overconfident, anything that you want to sort of speak to in terms of a challenge to that confidence, what you did to sort of, any strategies that you have in terms of trying to maintain it on a daily basis, or how you reacted in that moment, just sort of an opportunity to share personal experiences in terms of maintaining that confidence. So you want to start?
So in a way, I never had a choice to not be confident, partially because of the issue of, unfortunately, I'm still doing firsts, and that's really sad. I should not be still doing firsts, women, race, anything. I knew very early on that I was different, and I was the sort of sad and lonely kid who was overweight and liked Star Trek. So you gotta be pretty confident going into middle school, being a Trekkie.
So many identities.
I didn't have a lot of friends. I didn't fit in to any groups in any particular way. But the one thing that got me through high school especially was I knew I was smart. That was something that was not questionable. I didn't think I was attractive. I didn't think I was this. I didn't think I was that. But I knew I was smart. And I remember reading, I don't know if any of you are fans of James Michener. He wrote this book, Chesapeake. It's like a fiction about the history of Maryland. And there was this character, and she's a very strong woman, and she felt that she was ugly. But I remember her saying, but I know I'm smart. And that was what I held on to in high school. When I was being made fun of and everything else, I said, but I know I'm smart. And so the confidence that I got came from that. And I look at even just how my father treated me. It wasn't sort of the pat on your head, oh, don't you look cute. It was, he treated me as an intellectual. We shared books. My mom the same way. And so I went into college and my professional career never having leaned on the woman part of me in terms of being attractive or whatever. This whole concept of, you just showed a little leg and that type of thing was never something that I had the option. And so when you are moving through these spaces with your asset being that you are smart, you have a level of confidence because you are prepared. You do your work. I was gonna outwork everybody. I was gonna, I was gonna outperform. I was going to make it so that if somebody didn't give me an opportunity, it was only because I was a woman or black or anything else. It was not gonna be because I wasn't the best. And when you go through that, then you develop a level of confidence also just through that struggle. There's an anointing and an oil that comes from struggle, from going through. I meet people who had it so much easier in a lot of ways, but then a lot of times they become adults and one little thing happens and they completely fall apart. I've been called lots of different things. I've been told I didn't belong. I've been told things like, oh, well, you're never gonna be an ambassador. I've been told things even in the last few weeks. I was actually at a conference and there were only maybe 4 of us women in the room, and there's a woman I was next to. We've known each other professionally a little bit, and she happened to be Caucasian, and I was trying to sort of do the woman ally, well, at least we have each other, and she was like, but you're different. Like, we're not alike. Wow. And this was like 3 weeks ago. So it's not like this is something in the past. Yeah. But now, having survived the time when I didn't have the friends and that type of thing, I'm like, well, actually, she's right. I am different. And maybe it's not an issue of she's saying that from a perspective of being mean, but she does see that I have, necessarily a different struggle, but that I stand out, I'm different, but that's okay.
In a good way.
That's okay. I was on vacation, I just got back last week. I went to the UK, so one of my one of the things that I do to help build confidence is I study women, particularly women in royalty, medieval Europe. Particularly a specialist in British monarchy from the Plantagenet to Tudor period. Wow. And I study queens, particularly queens consort and queens regnant, and I've been doing intensive study, everybody from Eleanor I all the way up until Elizabeth I, who is my girl. And understanding how they exercise power in a male world, taking lessons. And I was at this BBC history conference in Winchester a couple weeks ago, and I remember sitting in the room, and it's me. I'm literally the only person of any color. I mean, any color. I'm the youngest person, again, by like 20 or 30 years. And I was so stinking happy because I had learned to just accept myself for who I am. I don't need other people necessarily around me who look like me, whatever. That confidence comes from knowing this is a space that I belong in, I'm interested, whatever. And when you radiate that, people become attracted to that. I had people inviting me out to dinner, inviting me to join Facebook groups, that type of thing. So living in your truth and being willing to have the hard times, being willing to be the only one, being willing to maybe have that cry in the bathroom when somebody mistreats you, but still going forward. And the process of going forward with that will actually create even more confidence. And then last thing I'll say is there's a physical and a spiritual armor that I think comes into all of these situations. You know, men have the power suit and that type of thing. And you mentioned, you know, the women, like you wore the heels. You know, whatever it is for you, whether it's, you know, hair or, you know, a certain bracelet or the kind of car you drive, there is a physical something that I think really helps. You know, there was a time when there was a lot of women who, in order to be taken seriously, they decided, like, I can't look good. You know, if I'm just frumpy, whatever, they'll just take me seriously. Men are visual, and they don't take you any more seriously just because you look terrible. And there's a confidence that also comes in knowing that you're doing the best that you can to try to take care of yourself and try to move forward. But then also like the spiritual. Whether, you know, everybody comes from different faiths. So whether it's affirmations, whether it's meditation, that type of thing. I wrote down, you know, one of the things that I have is, you know, in the Bible, it talks about putting on the whole armor of God and the helmet of salvation, sword of the Spirit, that type of thing. Whatever it is for you that every day you're able to just sort of wake up. I have alerts on my phone with various scriptures or various sayings that, you know, help me through the day. But whatever it is, whatever it takes. And don't be ashamed of that. Yeah. Don't be ashamed to have to actively work on your mental health, to actively work on keeping yourself up, because it can be a grind. And I can't even give examples of confidence because it happens every day. Yeah. It happens sometimes 5 times a day. So you just get up and you just realize, I'm still that smart, nerdy girl. Yep. I'm still worthy. And even if sometimes my current job or whatever I'm doing doesn't reflect it, I am who I am, and eventually there will be a space for me.
Mm-hmm. There are so many commonalities that I identify with. But everybody brings their particular story. So thank you so much for sharing that and those specific, I think, really helpful strategies of what you can do. And I think that's going to vary by individual. You know, I remember someone on my PhD committee saying, "Oh, you put on pantyhose before you give a lecture to a lot of people, right? That's going to be your armor." For me, that didn't work for me. So heels is what.
But Elizabeth I. Read about Elizabeth I.
Yep.
She was awesome.
Powerful icon. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to switch order a little bit, and I'm going to switch to Julie, because I know you're not able to stay for the extended time. We're surprising you with all the
I can't
extra
either.
time.
I can't either.
Okay. All right. In that case, why don't, or we could go to the audience, and you could kind of keep your thoughts on maintaining strategies and so forth. And let's go to the audience and help kind of shape some more specific questions. So anyone who has a question, please stand up. I know we have a microphone available. Please.
My name is Ada. I'm a first-year graduate student at the George Washington University. So I just have a question in terms of, like, we've talked a lot about, like, proactive approach that women should take to boost kind of our confidence, and also, like, you know, to achieve diversity and representation at different levels. But what are some of the ways that all of you have been taking, like, more organically, like more of a soft power approach to, you know, like, kind of earn our ground, earn our seat at the table?
Excellent.
Thank you.
Maybe take one more question, and then we can turn it back to the panel.
Hi, my name is Cathy Matsui. I'm a student at the British International School of Washington. And my question is, like, what are some barriers to women occupying positions of power? And have any of you experienced those types of barriers, like, in their work? Thank you.
Excellent. I think there was one more here too, so we can gather that and then turn it back.
Hello, my name is Chloe Colbert. I'm a SAIS alum, class of 2017, currently working at the State Department, Foreign Service. Thank you, ladies and ambassadors, for speaking today. I was at an event last night, and they, short story, talked about Black respectability and having to become a certain, more like whiteness to be taken seriously. In that context, as women, when have you felt that you've had to become more like men and masculine? And was it worth it, or did you feel like you needed to switch careers? Thank you.
I love that last question. I think it's unfortunate that things like confidence and capability and ability are somehow seen as masculine, and hoping that that's changing. Yeah, would you like to start?
Sure. Maybe I'll talk about some of the barriers for women. I mean, we have made amazing strides, and we shouldn't belittle that. And there have been many women on this stage that have helped blaze those trails, and many other amazing women. So we're on our way, but we have work to do. In terms of existing barriers, there's a whole array of obstacles. There are obstacles that we create for ourselves. So there's been plenty of evidence and research conducted about, a job post in the, let's say, the CIA or DOD or pick your agency state, and a man will look at it and say, all right, you need 10, they've outlined 10 criteria, and I hit 5, so therefore I'm qualified. That's the general stance. Women look at it and say, I have 5, I need 10, I'm gonna wait, I'm not gonna apply. So there's self-select, we do not promote ourselves forward, we do not push ourselves forward when we are qualified. There are plenty of women that hold back because they want to excel and they want to do it right and they want to be prepared, but so much so that they're missing the wave to go for that next promotion. There's then, on the other side, there's plenty of evidence that's been conducted about men hiring men that look like them, talk like them, act like them. I went to Yale, I'll hire someone from Yale. I'm from this town, I'll hire someone from my, region, or someone who talks like me, or someone who's had similar set of experiences, or we've worked for the same Supreme Court justice, or something like that. So people and women do this too, this kind of unconscious bias where you trend towards the familiar, and so that's an obstacle. Then there's blatant sexism and discrimination, and there's plenty of that to go around that still exists, not just in the field of national security, but actually exists in many, many fields, where people just deliberately decide that the woman candidate, for one reason or another, is either lacking executive presence because she's a little bit soft-spoken and a bit of an introvert, or she's bossy and overly confident because she leans in and she's trying to be like a man or be more masculine in how she presents and talks about national security matters in a male-dominated world. And so the obstacles go on and on and on. That's just a few. And so women do, I feel like, still have to work harder at it. You have to get the confidence. You've got to put yourself out there. I mean, the best piece of advice I ever got when I told Madeleine Albright, who's been a great friend and mentor to me over the years, that I had this new job in the White House and I was anxious about it, and going over there in this environment, I had to operate. I'm a Europeanist by training, and I had to operate across the globe, and I said, I just don't know how this is going to go when I'm sitting in the room, in the Situation Room or wherever. And she said, listen to the men. Listen to them. Listen to what they're saying, and you'll find that despite the tone and the posture that they take, they might not always know what they're talking about. And she said, she had the same feeling when she went up to the United Nations and settled in there in the UN Security Council and assumed her seat. Also admittedly said she was a bit hesitant to lean in, and she started listening and she realized, okay, there's some brilliant minds in this room. There's some people who have no idea what they're talking about. And you've got to filter through the confidence that men can tend to project, and understand that you too can put yourself out there, and maybe you don't have, you didn't invent fire or cure cancer or whatever it is, but that you have something to say, and that you have to have the confidence to join the conversation, knowing that sometimes maybe it won't be the most brilliant thought, but you've got to take the risks and do that. And then on the question, just lastly about adapting, I mean, I certainly, my first couple years at the Pentagon, my whole closet, it was just an array of black suits. That's all it was. With, as you pointed out, no jewelry, put my hair up, I downplayed the white shirt, I mean, I look at those pictures in horror sometimes of what I was trying to do, because I saw a heavily male-dominated environment, a lot of other dark suits, and I thought, well, I better just fold in here and ignore the gender piece and not make it about me and my gender, and so I will just dress like everybody else. And eventually I came to realize I was a bit ridiculous, and that you can dress really any way you want. You don't have to wear a black suit every day. And then once I was pregnant, obviously, I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna let it all hang out here. I have no choice. But you got to get to own it at that point. But yeah, I think women. You'll talk to a lot of women in this town that felt compelled early on in their career. I think now women are understanding that, do whatever feels comfortable to you, and don't get, caught up in playing a part, playing a role. I mean, certainly you do want to join those that are confident at the table and stiffen your spine and raise your hand even when you don't have every thought sorted out, but get into the conversation. That's where you do have to play the part, but you don't have to look the part necessarily, and there's a difference there.
Can I please also ask those who are students to take Julie's words to heart, and to, even if you're in the classroom, not feel just because you don't have an absolutely perfectly formed and articulated thought that you shouldn't join the discussion. Please don't let that inhibit you. Thank you so much for that. Cindy.
Did you want to get to...
Well, I think we'll have time for everybody to respond, and then we'll finish officially at 1:25, so those who have to leave can't, if there are those who can continue to stay.
I will tell you, there was something that shaped me beginning of my senior year in high school, that shaped how I looked myself. I had an incredible health issue where my entire face dehydrated, cracked, and I had to lose the first layer of my skin. And my mother said, you don't have to go to school for the first month. I said, oh, what the heck, they're going to tease me anyway, so they're going to call me snakeskin. So I went to school. So my best friends teased me, and that became the thing that said, no matter how bad you look, you got to show up. And so, I'm not saying it was courage, but I wanted to go to school. I was like, I want to go to school. And so I wasn't going to let that go. So in terms of, situations where, you almost fall on your face or come pretty close, or I didn't think I could win the day in the meeting. So it was at the NSC, and there was a meeting that I thought the president should not have. And I sent up the first 43, and I sent up the first memo saying why this meeting shouldn't happen. Didn't get a response. Sent a second one to Steve Hadley. Didn't get a response. And I said a third. He said, Cindy, you can't win this one. And so, but I needed to be on the record to articulate why I thought it was important. So, at the third time, I stopped. So the meeting happened. The meeting went exactly the way I thought it was going to go, and it went south. And so I was very disappointed because I thought we could have avoided that meeting, but I did not have the political lift to stop the meeting. So I think that's important to know. And you talk about the violence. I did have one before I left government about 5 years ago, the dean of the school, and he did it in the presence, fortunately, of a white male who was a friend, and he banged his fist on the table and visibly got angry in that room. And the president of the institution supported him. The others rallied around him. Needless to say, there was an EEO case, and that went the direction it went. But I'm just going to say that it's not just the senior leadership. If there's no accountability at middle-level management, it doesn't matter how wonderful a policy you have. So if the middle-level manager isn't going to do what he or she, because women can repress, and women do repress other women, based on class and many other things, or fear that they would become the target. So until we have that accountability throughout that level, so for that kind of actions, that person should have been brought right in. That did not happen. And I'm not the first, and unfortunately I'm not going to be the last in that. But I do think you have to make sure that you belong, my activists belong to entities, so there were groups who did rally around me, that those mentors and those patrons come in to support, but they're not going to see it all. So that's where we have to do these other kinds of things. So I wouldn't take away or any of the things that I experienced, because most certainly they have shaped me. And in our earlier discussions, our round table, we talked about failure. So those failures have shaped me. And you put on whatever armor you need to walk into that room, and you could be shaking inside. They just don't need to see you shake, But and you're right. And the guys will say whatever. And I saw it teaching as well, that my male students would tend to talk all the time. And I had to say, no, wait a minute. And I would say to the women, I said, I will call on you. And I did, because you need to speak. And actually, I did pull some of my women students aside. And I said, you cannot be in this room and not talk when your class participation grade is 30%. And I said, and if you're doing it in my male counterparts class, you are hurting yourself. So you do have to speak up in the room. You have to be present. So, so those are some of my challenges.
Thank you so much. Let's turn to Paula and then Marion.
I totally agree with the comment that you have to have a presence. In fact, I think of, in terms of confidence, you won't know what you're capable of if you don't get yourself out there. And so part of it is, getting out there. And whether it's in your meeting or you're in a conference, it is standing up, speaking, addressing issues, and having that kind of belief in yourself for what you're about. Madeleine Albright, when I happened to be an intern, I should have mentioned, at the NSC, at the end of the Carter administration, Madeleine Albright was at NSC. And at that time, interestingly enough, she was dealing with congressional issues. So I've known her a long time and over the span of my career. But why I mention it, I want to add a footnote to what Julie said. I love what she says when she says, you're in a room and you got all of these men around the table, and she will say that you got to get out there and you got to make your statement. But then there's part two, and you know what part two is. And this is an important thing for all of you to think about. So then she said that afterwards, okay, she made a statement, and then they move on, and then some guy says the exact same thing that she said. And then, there's another guy there, and he pats them, Joe said that. And she's just sitting there like, well, nobody is coming back to my point. I already said that. Mm-hmm. So another factor in this, and I think each of us have said this, another part of confidence is also building your alliances and your associations and your friendships. Whether you're in government or whether you're in the private sector, your academia, whichever, you want to have also women allies. Or it could be men, but in this case, but here she was saying, and it really stuck with me, that she's sitting there, well, they're taking away what I already said. So to add to that, I don't think you should ever change yourself. You should be what you are and build upon your own assets and strengths. Admittedly, when I started at the NSC, and I mentioned my age, I was young, and so yeah, I thought I had to kind of dress in a more, down part. You could see I like colors. And I haven't been, as I moved on, I thought, no, I am who I am, and I'm going to look at the way I want to. I'm going to address issues the way I want to. I want to also prove that you can do all of that and be effective. I do want to mention two last things. Julie mentioned that she was pregnant during her career. At the time, one of the reasons, admittedly, I didn't go into the Foreign Service because during my class and my year, actually, you could know French and they will send you, let's say, to China. And even though you had an expertise, and it's the opposite part. But the other thing was relevant to women. If you married another Foreign Service officer or you get married, they didn't really provide for, continuing your career and providing for that built-in the family component. But what was worse, if you're married a foreign service officer, it was expected actually that the female was the one who would resign, and then you basically go where your husband goes. And I found that, I knew at my age, it was a disincentive. I didn't want that. And I rolled the dice and I decided, okay, I'm going to go the political route, although I did want to be a foreign service officer. I went the political route because I felt I'd have more flexibility, and I'll risk, being hired and fired and all the things that go with coming in and out with an administration. But I felt I had more room for myself, actually, in growing. And that also gave me a lot of confidence. And I'll end on this one. I mentioned about, people not having a bias about, say, oh, okay, well, maybe the Pentagon, someone in uniform, they're going to have X, Y, and Z view. So when I worked at NSC, I remember we were supposed to set up a meeting on Poland, and it fell to me, and I set up this meeting on Poland. We tried and tried and tried to get the consultant who was working with us to get to that meeting. Again, we didn't have, iPhones, texting. We were just phoning the guy, and never called, no answer, no nothing. So I went ahead and held the meeting. So then we even tried after the fact and called this individual and told him, look, the meeting took place and I want to give you a readout. The first thing he said to me, you're in big trouble. You didn't include me in the meeting. And I said, we made every effort to get you. I'm not the only one. And then I mentioned, this person, that person, we all phoned you. And then he made a comment, well, I'm sorry. This is going to be reported to the National Security Advisor, and, you were out of order. You shouldn't have done that. So I'm going to tell you, I felt so high, but I decided, I'm going to go across the street, meaning from the old executive office building to the West Wing, and I'm going to complain about what happened. I thought that was just so out of order. So when I went over, I remember there were two people, one of whom had actually both had military backgrounds. And one of them, who was the operational person on this, said to me, Paula, what happened? And then I told him what happened, and he said, you know what we're going to do today? We're going to issue a memorandum, and we're going to say that hereto going forward, you're in charge of everything related to all the future meetings on Poland. And I thought, wow, okay. But why I'm sharing that experience, that was earlier on, and that gave me that kind of, experience also gives you the kind of confidence in going forward. You feel, okay, there are reasonable people, and, then, okay, that really just builds your own esteem and the foundation at which you know that you got to be at, and there's no going back. So I know that all of us have had some situation in our lives like that, but it's something that you learn from and spring from.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Before I turn to Mary and to ask her comments on confidence and then some of the audience questions that have been asked, I'm going to make an executive decision because I think that women are often asked to stay longer than they were originally asked to stay, and we don't want anyone to have to miss out on the discussion because they are planning to leave at exactly the time we told them to leave. So I'm going to have Mary make the last set of comments for this panel. We were able to get some questions from the audience. If there are those who are able to stay, perhaps you can approach them. But I just wanted to say thank you for those questions. But I do want to make sure that we end on time so that we don't mess with anyone's schedules or leave anyone out.
By the way, thank you on that, and I apologize because I scheduled something.
No, do not apologize. Also, women, we apologize too much. But no, we asked for a particular time, and so I want to stick to that. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. Look how we're learning from each other. This is so good. Mary, I want a big responsibility now. The last comments are yours. But
totally triggering my insecurity and lack of confidence.
But you're among allies, I think. And also, I think it's important to have a non-government perspective because we've had a lot of these excellent sort of discussions from DOD and from state and so forth. So if you can sort of answer from your perspective from the non-government world in terms of confidence and obstacles and having to conform to particular ideals.
Okay, here we go. I'm just turning 61. when I look back on it, I would say that the first 40 years of my life, I had very little confidence. And it makes me sad to think about it because, you know, I was great and I should have felt better about it. And so I think just, I was always trying to fit in. I never really did, for a completely different set of reasons that others have mentioned. And one of them is come from an activist family as well. My father is Daniel Ellsberg, who released the Pentagon Papers, so you probably hear about him here and there. With what's going on now, or you saw the movie The Post, he was the guy from the Russians, who was, what's
the
his name?
Americans, yeah.
What?
Is that what you mean, on the Americans?
Yeah, the Americans. He played my father.
Right.
Did not get to meet him at the debut, but whatever. So and my mother was very, very concerned that we should not be known, you know, that we should not get a lot of publicity and people. And I think she actually just thought, remembered this, but she told us to never tell anybody about our father because my parents were divorced, because they would look at us differently, or they would try and use us or exploit us, or people were not going to approach us because they knew, you know, because of me, it was going to be because of my father. And that actually was the case for most of my life. And I never talked about it. I mean, for me to say it in a meeting like this is like it's more common now, but it would have been impossible 20 years ago. And because I was so determined to be sort of invisible, fit in, and not be unusual, and not have people say, oh my God, you're Daniel Ellsberg's daughter, what was that like, blah, 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 you know, and start having expectations about me, either that, you know, lots of different things they might expect, good or bad. So I think that probably had a big influence on me, and I would go into environments that were particularly difficult ones, and just, you know, like going into the Nicaraguan Revolution at a time when they were, you know, absolutely at war in conflict with the US government, put me in an odd situation, and I was determined to fit in. And then working for the Swedish government, Swedes are like really quiet, and I am not at all quiet. And so like constantly being in places where for me to fit in and to feel like people were gonna like me, I had to be a completely different person. And so I just did that for a lot of my life, and I would do it in different environments, you know, at the same period of my life. I'd be in church, and then I'd be at the demonstration, and then I, you know, would be whatever. So I think that made it really hard for me to have a sense of myself and who I was and why people might like me for myself. And it made me really angry when I thought that they did not understand. I would constantly be apologizing. I'd be saying, well, you know, I'm not when I was working for the Swedes and there were all these male doctors and I wasn't a doctor, I didn't have a graduate degree, but I really knew the situation there. I've been working in public health for years. I kept saying, well, I'm not an expert, but I think this and this and this, or I'd apologize. And then I'd be furious because they'd treat me like I wasn't an expert, like I didn't know anything. And I'm like, what? You know, you're supposed to say, oh, but you know so much. They'd call me their princess. They would, you know, whatever you want, you're the princess here, like really patronizing stuff. And I couldn't really get that I was also bringing it on myself by constantly telling people that I didn't really know what I was doing. So those are all things that I kind of wish I had known. The other thing is that I was very emotional. I'd get really mad. I'd cry at meetings. I remember my mother, I'd come home and tell my mother in my 30s about like this horrible meeting I had with a coworker. She said, but you didn't cry, right? And so like that was the standard of whether the meeting had gone well, is whether I'd managed to keep from crying. So lots of, you know, therapy. Therapy, you know, being properly medicated also has helped me a lot. And, you know, just why not just, you know, put it out there. And then I think what happened to me was I had this kind of chip. And when I met some professors, Swedish professors, who invited me to get my PhD, and I was doing it on something that was really important to me, as an activist. And I was in this environment where like they just all thought I was great because I was like not only smart, but I was working hard and I was asking questions. And I was in an environment where people were actually more interested in not showing off at how smart they were, but like getting to the truth. Well, let's bring in this, you know, my professors were saying, let's bring in this other person because they know more about it or something, you know. So it was like, it was a whole other environment where that felt really authentic. That just felt like who I could be. And when I was 40, I got my PhD, and that was really hard for me, and I knew it was going to be really hard. I was really afraid of it. And then when I got it, and also Swedes put on really good parties after PhDs, like it's just they cherish you. They write songs about you. You have big dinners. There's silly tricks. It's wonderful. And people come from all over, and it's a big public thing. And I felt so cherished and loved, and I thought, wow, I did it. I did the thing that was kind of like the thing that I could never do. And it was kind of like, okay, I'm just gonna, you know, that was enough. So I'm not saying that everybody has to have a PhD. Everybody in my family had them. I was rejecting it. Somehow, at some very deep level, it helped me think, okay, well, that's enough. That was enough. And that's been the last 20 years. And now I do stuff that, even when I wasn't in a very powerful position, like now I have more power, and I do this in a way to show younger people that they can. But like I started knitting, and it calmed me down, and I kind of realized that I had ADD, and it helped me kind of just concentrate. So I'd knit in meetings, and the older men and everybody thought that was nuts. And I'm just like, who cares? This helps me. I'm doing, so it's very important to keep eye contact while you're knitting, so don't do anything where you have to count stitches. That's important in terms of like life lessons I can give you. But like people realized I was paying attention, I was contributing, I was making beautiful hats that I would give away at the end of the meeting. I would have like the most productive meetings of anybody. And it became kind of a joke, and here's my purple, you know, nails, and I'm kind of just a crazy old lady in some ways, but it kind of, I don't care as much anymore. And that actually is a really good feeling. And if by doing that stuff and still being in a powerful position, I'm hoping that that just gives permission for everybody to like figure out the thing that makes them feel whole and authentic, and not wait till they're 40 to get there.
Mary, I know I've put a lot of pressure on you on sort of being the last speaker, but that was, I think, an absolutely fantastic way to round out this discussion, and a very personal discussion, and each of you have shared personal stories, personal anecdotes, and I think that is what has made this such an incredibly rich and valuable discussion. I know I've learned a lot. I've identified lots of points of commonality. I think we can be each other's allies, and I just want to ask you to join me in thanking these outstanding women for sharing their time.
Thank you so very much for coming. This has been an exciting and enlightening experience. Thank you so very much. I can't thank you enough. And so we at SAIS Women Lead, as you would have noticed, we kind of tend to walk the talk. And so we want to extend an opportunity to you to join in this movement. We have a couple requests out there. Number one, we would want to partner with you for our SAIS Women Lead Practicum in terms of sourcing partners as well as sourcing funding partners. Secondly, we also want to partner with you for our establishing kind of a research footprint. We have big plans. We'll be making some announcements to that shortly. We also want to partner with you here for our upcoming programs in terms of expertise. So we'll be, reaching out to you all very shortly to continue with this discussion. Having said that, may I just say thank you again for coming? Really, thank you.